The world was once locked in the grip of ice, a vast epoch when glaciers pushed down across continents, carving valleys and reshaping landscapes. It was the Pleistocene Ice Age, a period stretching back hundreds of thousands of years, punctuated by sudden warm interludes and colder descents. Humanity, fragile yet adaptive, survived these shifts not by strength, but by ingenuity. Across the shifting landscapes of tundra, desert and fertile floodplain, survival often depended on building, burrowing and finding refuge. When the discussion turns to the Great Pyramids of Egypt, usually the story begins with pharaohs, funerary rites, and the march of dynasties along the Nile. Yet a growing number of voices have wondered aloud, what if these massive structures had an earlier purpose? What if, long before dynasties carved their names into stone, the pyramids were meant to be shelters, safe havens built against the storms and disasters of the Ice Age? So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I'm doing here, and share where you are watching from, along with the local time where you are. Now let's move into the frozen world of a distant past. The Nile River Valley today is a ribbon of green cutting through endless desert. Yet during the Ice Age, northern Africa was not the same desolate expanse. Pollen studies and ancient lake sediments suggest that vast stretches of the Sahara were once savannas and grasslands, punctuated by great rivers that have since vanished. The land that appears eternal and dry was once shifting, unstable, vulnerable to cycles of monsoon and drought. Some scholars argue that these violent fluctuations could have driven early communities to seek refuge in monumental constructions. The pyramids, with their massive limestone casings and deep interior chambers, seem almost too robust for mere tombs. Their strength suggests defensive design, and in this possibility lies the beginning of our hypothesis. The Ice Age brought not only glaciers but also storms, dust and floods. Researchers studying ice cores in Greenland have revealed rapid swings in climate, sudden cold snaps that lasted centuries, and equally sudden thaws. These changes were global, affecting rainfall in Africa and flooding the Nile with unpredictable surges. In such times, shelter would have been essential. Archaeologists still debate whether Egyptian civilization grew uninterrupted from local farming cultures or was seeded by survivors of earlier, more advanced societies. If the latter, then the pyramids could be remnants of a survival strategy rather than ceremonial expressions of later dynasties. Historians have long debated whether the Great Pyramid of Giza truly functioned as a tomb. No mummies were ever found in its primary chamber, only empty sarcophagi and sealed passageways. Traditional explanations suggest robbers stripped them centuries ago. But the sheer absence of funerary, goods, inscriptions, or the trappings of ritual in the Great Pyramid leaves a strange silence. Some scholars point out that other royal tombs of Egypt, such as those in the Valley of the Kings, are filled with hieroglyphs and painted narratives of the afterlife. Why then is the Great Pyramid so stark, so empty, so geometric? The possibility arises that its interior was not designed for ritual, but for practical survival. If one imagines an Ice Age storm sweeping across North Africa, carrying dust that blots out the sun and rains that collapse fragile huts, the scale of the pyramids begins to make sense. Their angled sides could have deflected high winds. Their stone bulk would have resisted flooding. Inside, narrow passageways may have slowed the rush of water or controlled airflow for those hidden within. In this interpretation, the pyramid becomes a fortress against nature, a shelter built not for eternity, but for the urgent preservation of life. This theory gains support from the broader human story. In Anatolia, Göbekli Tepe rises from the earth with megalithic pillars dated to around 12,000 years ago, at the very end of the Ice Age. Its construction suggests organized communities capable of great feats, long before conventional timelines of civilization. In Malta, massive underground temples hint at shelter as much as ritual. If scattered groups across the world were building stone complexes at the close of the Ice Age, Might Egypt's pyramids have roots even deeper than dynastic Egypt, reaching back to that era of survival? Historians are still debating whether the dynasties simply inherited these sites or built them entirely anew. Stranger still are the geological clues. The Sphinx, situated near the pyramids, shows patterns of erosion that some geologists attribute not to wind, but to heavy rainfall. Rainfall Egypt has not seen for thousands of years, except during the pluvial periods of the Late Ice Age. If the Sphinx bears the scars of torrential storms, then the pyramids standing nearby may also date from a wetter, storm-lashed era. Controversial though this claim is, it opens the door to a re-examination of these monuments not as isolated products of a desert civilization, but as adaptive architecture in a turbulent world. There is also the matter of scale. Why would a culture invest decades, perhaps generations, in building structures so large they dominated the horizon? For kingship, certainly, but perhaps also because nothing smaller could have withstood the chaos of climate. Smaller dwellings would have been swept away, but pyramids, anchored deep into the bedrock, could endure. If early builders faced cycles of drought and flood, then to build something that could resist both would have been a matter of survival strategy. It may not be coincidence that pyramids are solid rather than hollow. They contain small chambers, yes, but the majority is stone mass, stone that could protect against heat, cold, or sudden disaster. Archaeological discoveries sometimes fuel this speculation further. Recent scans using muon radiography revealed hidden voids within the Great Pyramid, large spaces that have never been accessed. Their purpose is unknown, but the speculation ranges from storage areas to chambers meant for people. If they were designed as refuges, they could have held groups of survivors, supplies, or sacred relics necessary for rebuilding society after catastrophe. Historians disagree, as the evidence is fragmentary, but the mystery lingers. Curiously, ancient Egyptian myths often reference cycles of destruction. Texts describe times when floods or fire consume the world, and when only a few survive to begin again. Some traditions mention that Thoth, the god of wisdom, preserved knowledge in hidden chambers. These stories may be allegory, but they could also reflect cultural memory of real catastrophes encoded into myth and ritual. If so, the pyramids themselves might be the physical counterpart to such tales, literal vessels of survival. The hypothesis of pyramids as Ice Age shelters also brings into question the relationship between survival and symbolism. Could a structure built for refuge later acquire sacred meaning? It would not be the first time. In many parts of the world, natural caves that once sheltered people from storms later became shrines. Fortresses became temples, and practical architecture became sacred. The reuse of pyramids by dynasties as tombs could therefore represent a reinterpretation of structures whose original purpose had been forgotten. The practical had been transformed into the symbolic. A strange example lies in the medieval reuse of Roman aqueducts, often mistaken for devil's bridges by later villagers. Their original engineering purpose had been lost, replaced with superstition. So too the pyramids might have shifted in meaning as centuries passed, until pharaohs claimed them as their own. Historians are still debating whether this reinterpretation was deliberate propaganda or simply the natural evolution of cultural memory. For now, no definitive evidence proves the pyramids were Ice Age shelters. Yet the clues, erosion, myths, anomalies in design, absence of funerary decoration and global parallels, invite curiosity. New discoveries and controversial evidence continually fuel the debate. Hypotheses that once sounded impossible gain traction when set against the uncertainties of deep history. In the silence of the pyramid chambers, one can almost imagine huddled groups of people waiting out a storm, stone walls vibrating with distant thunder, fires burning low in the darkness. The idea may never be proven, but it cannot be dismissed outright. It stands as a reminder that history is layered, that the monuments of the past may hold stories far older than those carved into their surfaces. The shifting climate of North Africa tells a story often overlooked in discussions of the pyramids. Today, the Sahara is imagined as timeless, endless dunes rolling to the horizon, an ocean of sand that seems eternal. Yet geological and archaeological studies reveal that the desert is young, at least in its current form. During the last ice age, vast regions of the Sahara were green. Rivers crossed its surface, lakes filled its basins, and grassland supported herds of antelope and even crocodiles. The transformation from fertile savanna to the desert of today was not gradual in the way one might assume. It came in pulses, shifts that sometimes unfolded within a single human lifetime. Such rapid swings could have left ancient communities desperate for stability. If one were to search for evidence of their solutions, the pyramids stand as the most enigmatic candidates. Sediment cores from dried lake beds across Chad, Niger, and Libya reveal alternating layers of organic material and desert dust. These alternating bands suggest repeating cycles, wet periods when monsoons surged north, followed by dry collapses when the rains retreated southward. This pattern created what some call the Sahara pump, a mechanism that alternately drew humans and animals into the region during fertile phases and expelled them during droughts. Scholars still debate whether such cycles directly influence the rise of Nile civilizations. Some argue that every surge of monsoons brought waves of migration into the Nile Valley, forcing innovation and adaptation. Others insist the Nile's yearly flood created enough stability to insulate its people. Yet even along the Nile, evidence suggests erratic behaviour. Floods that sometimes failed entirely, followed by years of destructive overflow. For societies dependent on agriculture, such volatility would have been existential. In this context, monumental architecture takes on new meaning. The pyramids were not built in an unchanging desert, but in a landscape of shifting fertility, dust storms, and uncertain waters. Their construction may have been less about glorifying kings than about ensuring continuity through crisis. The durability of stone contrasted sharply with the fragility of mud brick, the usual building material of ancient Egypt. Temples, palaces, and homes made from sun-dried brick crumbled under weather and time. Only stone endured. To build in stone on such a scale was to reach for permanence in an impermanent world. Evidence from rock art scattered across the Sahara deepens the mystery. Petroglyphs carved into cliffs and shelters depict giraffes, elephants, cattle, and boats. Images impossible in the desert we see today. Some of these engravings are dated to more than 8,000 years ago, during what geologists call the African humid period. This was long before the reign of Khufu or the dynasties typically associated with pyramid building. Historians are still debating whether the continuity between these pastoral cultures and later Nile dynasties was direct, or whether great disruptions erased earlier traditions. If continuity existed, then survivors of those green Sahara societies may have carried knowledge into the Nile Valley, where it found expression in monumental stone. The very orientation of the pyramids may hint at a world in flux. They are aligned with incredible precision to the cardinal directions, suggesting an acute awareness of the heavens. Some argue this alignment was ritual, a reflection of cosmology, but it may also have had practical value. When landscapes shifted, when lakes dried, rivers shifted course, and storms obscured landmarks, the unchanging stars offered the only reliable reference. To orient a monument to the sky was to anchor it to something eternal, something beyond climate chaos. In this sense, the pyramids could have served both as shelters and as celestial beacons, fixed points for navigation through both physical and temporal upheaval. Strange evidence further complicates the story. Around the pyramids are traces of harbours and waterworks, as if the Giza Plateau was once a hub of river transport. Ancient causeways and basins hint that boats may have docked near the pyramids themselves. Some archaeologists suggest these were ceremonial, tied to funerary processions, yet others see in them evidence of adaptation to higher Nile floods, or perhaps even a wetter climate. If the pyramids were shelters, access by boat during flood events would have been essential. Communities could have retreated into them with food and supplies, ferried along channels now buried under sand. The debate extends beyond Egypt. In Sudan, the ruins of Napata and Meroe hold smaller pyramids that echo those of Giza, though built centuries later. Were these imitations of royal tombs, or attempts to replicate survival architecture adapted for local needs? Across the ocean in Mesoamerica, pyramidal structures rise in Mexico and Guatemala, built by civilizations separated by millennia and oceans. Scholars are still debating whether such similarities are coincidence, the product of universal geometry, or evidence of shared functional needs in a turbulent world. The shape of the pyramid, stable and resistant, may have been a near-universal solution to natural disasters. Historians often frame pyramids as monuments of death, yet one could equally frame them as monuments of survival. Their angled sides shed sand as easily as rain. Their mass anchors them against earthquakes. Their height rises above floodwaters. Unlike temples filled with inscriptions and decoration, the inner chambers of the Great Pyramid are stark, almost austere. If built as tombs, they are oddly silent compared to richly adorned burial sites elsewhere in Egypt. If built as shelters, the silence makes more sense. There would have been no need for ornament, only for durability. Still, mysteries remain that complicate this view. Within the pyramids are narrow shafts that angle upward from the chambers to the outer surface. Conventional theories suggest they align with stars for symbolic reasons, but engineers note their function could also involve airflow. In a sealed stone shelter, ventilation would be vital for survival. The shafts might have provided oxygen and carried away smoke from torches or fires. Whether intentional or symbolic, their existence raises questions that fuel the debate. One strange event from more recent history adds an eerie layer. In the 19th century, explorers who entered the pyramids reported an odd sense of stillness, as if the structures themselves altered perception. Some even described unusual acoustics, with footsteps echoing in ways that disoriented visitors. While such accounts may be exaggerated, modern acoustic studies confirm that the Grand Gallery resonates strongly at specific frequencies. Some speculate this was ritual. Others wonder whether such resonance could have played a role in calming those inside, or perhaps in signalling across chambers. Historians remain divided on whether this was intentional design or coincidence. The pyramids also sit at a geographical crossroad. The Nile connects the Mediterranean to the African interior, a corridor for migration during times of change. Communities fleeing advancing deserts or floods could have converged here. The Giza Plateau, elevated above the floodplain yet close to the river, was an ideal site for refuge. Building massive stone structures there would have ensured a stable centre for generations, a beacon for displaced people. In this interpretation, the pyramids are not just tombs of kings but monuments of gathering, built to preserve communities through cycles of loss and return. Theories of this kind remain controversial. Most Egyptologists maintain that the pyramids were royal tombs, built by dynastic Egyptians at specific times in history. Yet even within mainstream scholarship, debates persist over details. Why so little funerary material inside? Why such extraordinary engineering effort? And why alignments that seem more practical than symbolic? These open questions keep the door ajar for alternative hypotheses. Archaeology is as much about what is missing as about what is found. The absence of evidence for tombs in the Great Pyramid remains a silence that provokes speculation. As the climate story of the Sahara unfolds, the hypothesis of pyramids as Ice Age shelters becomes less improbable. The land was not always desert. Communities did endure rapid climate change, and in times of upheaval, the will to survive often leaves traces in stone. Whether the pyramids were designed for this purpose may never be resolved, but to consider them in this light deepens their mystery. They stand not only as monuments of power, but also as echoes of human resilience against a restless earth. The pyramids rise against the skyline like immovable mountains, yet their form is far from arbitrary. To withstand the passage of thousands of years, They had to be more than symbolic constructions. They had to resist the forces of nature, storms of sand, sudden floods, and the steady pull of erosion. To imagine them not as tombs but as survival fortresses is to look again at their engineering, at the deliberate choices of stone, angle, and structure. It is here, in their geometry and resilience, that the possibility of Ice Age shelters becomes most compelling. The pyramid shape itself is one of stability. Unlike vertical towers that can topple under strain, the pyramid distributes weight evenly downward through its broad base. This makes it uniquely resistant to earthquakes, floods, and even high winds. In regions where violent weather could mean sudden death, the pyramid form offered endurance unmatched by other designs. Historians are still debating whether ancient engineers understood this principle consciously, or whether it emerged from trial and error. Either way, the result is undeniable. A structure that has stood unbroken for more than 4,000 years, shrugging off storms that reduced nearby cities to dust. The Great Pyramid at Giza, with an original height of nearly 147 metres, contains an estimated 2.3 million stone blocks. Many weigh between 2.5 and 15 tons, with some granite pieces exceeding 50 tons. Each block contributes to the fortress-like mass, compressing the structure into immovability. In comparison, most ancient tombs and temples use lighter materials, their walls hollow and vulnerable. If the Great Pyramid were intended only as a symbolic tomb, the immense investment seems disproportionate. But if it was designed as a bastion against catastrophe, the scale acquires a grim logic. A structure meant to shelter life through ages of storm had to be immense, had to resist every force the world could unleash. During the Ice Age, dust storms would have swept across northern Africa. Studies of marine cores off the coast reveal thick layers of Saharan dust deposited into the Atlantic. These layers coincide with glacial periods when winds intensified. Dust storms could strip farmland bare, choke rivers, and bury settlements. The pyramid's sloping sides, however, are perfectly designed to deflect such storms. Sand cannot accumulate against them for long. Wind glances away. Even when dunes rise, their weight slides off, leaving the structure exposed but unbroken. In this light, the pyramid was more than monument. It was shield. The material choices reinforce this interpretation. The outer casing stones, originally polished limestone, reflected sunlight with a brilliance that earned the pyramid's descriptions of glowing mountains. But limestone also resists weathering, shielding the inner core from erosion. Inside, chambers of granite were chosen for their hardness and stability. Granite quarries at Aswan, hundreds of kilometres upriver, supplied these blocks. To transport them was an enormous effort, yet if the goal was ultimate endurance, only such stone would suffice. Survival demanded permanence. Archaeologists note the precision with which the stones are cut and fitted. Many seams are so tight that a blade cannot be inserted between blocks. For tombs, such precision seems unnecessary. For survival shelters, however, it would have been critical. Cracks admit water, sand, and wind. Tight seams keep the elements out, preserving the interior. The very labour that mystifies historians, the extraordinary effort invested in accuracy, may have been essential for a structure meant to protect life, not merely commemorate death. The interior also deserves attention. The Great Pyramid's passageways are narrow, slanting, and layered. To reach the king's chamber, one must pass through the grand gallery, an ascending corridor with corbelled walls. This design is both elegant and functional. The narrowing ceiling prevents collapse under pressure. In engineering terms, it distributes stress, allowing the passage to endure enormous weight above. If seen as a survival shelter, the grand gallery could have been both entrance and buffer, a choke point where airflow could be managed, or floodwaters slowed before reaching the inner sanctum. Ventilation shafts extend from the king's and queen's chambers to the pyramid's exterior. Their angles align with stars, leading most Egyptologists to interpret them symbolically. But engineers have noted their usefulness in air circulation. In a sealed chamber, the build-up of smoke, Carbon dioxide or humidity could be fatal. Shafts would have allowed for the exchange of air, whether intentional or incidental. Historians are still debating whether these shafts were deliberately functional or symbolic, yet the overlap of sacred and practical is not unusual in ancient architecture. A ritual explanation may conceal a survival necessity. Consider also the sheer redundancy built into the structure. The pyramid contains relieving chambers above the king's chamber, 5 layers of granite blocks arranged to divert pressure. Without them, the chamber would collapse under the mass of stone above. For a tomb, 1 chamber might have sufficed. For a survival space, redundancy was crucial. If one chamber failed, others absorbed the strain. The builders anticipated disaster and engineered against it, ensuring stability across millennia. Outside, the orientation of the pyramids reflects similar precision. Their sides are aligned almost perfectly with the cardinal points, deviating by less than a fraction of a degree. While ritual explanations abound, practical ones remain plausible. In a world where storms and floods could obscure landmarks, orientation to the North Star and the rising sun provided reliable bearings. Even if rivers shifted or dunes buried familiar ground, the pyramids would remain fixed points, anchors for those seeking shelter. Comparisons to other ancient architecture reinforce the interpretation. In Mesopotamia, ziggurats rose as terraced pyramids of mud brick, vulnerable to erosion but serving as raised sanctuaries against floods. In Central America, Maya, pyramids combined ritual and defensive functions, their broad steps and sloped sides making them resistant to collapse. Across cultures, the pyramid form repeatedly emerges where stability is prized. Egypt's pyramids, built of stone rather than brick, represented the ultimate refinement, shelter rendered eternal. The question remains, were such efforts beyond the means of dynastic Egyptians alone? Some argue that only an earlier, more advanced culture, perhaps one forged in the crucible of Ice Age disasters, could have envisioned such fortresses. The mainstream view holds that the pyramids were indeed royal tombs, products of a highly organised but distinctly Bronze Age society. Yet anomalies persist. The absence of hieroglyphic decoration in the Great Pyramid, the lack of funerary goods, the silence of chambers. If the structure was purely funerary, it is unlike any other tomb in Egypt. If it was survival-oriented, its differences become more understandable. Stranger still are the legends surrounding the pyramids. Medieval Arab historians describe them as granaries of Joseph, or as repositories of ancient knowledge built before the flood. These accounts are often dismissed as myth, yet they preserve the idea of pyramids as places of refuge, not burial. Could such stories preserve distant echoes of Ice Age survival strategies? Historians are still debating whether folklore preserves kernels of truth or merely imagination. The ambiguity itself fuels curiosity. A curious episode unfolded in 1798, when Napoleon's expedition entered the Great Pyramid. Accounts differ, but it is said that Napoleon spent time alone in the king's chamber and emerged visibly shaken, refusing to describe what he had felt. Some later suggested he experienced a vision, others that the chamber's acoustics or atmosphere disturbed him. While the tale may be apocryphal, it aligns with recurring themes. The pyramid is not merely inert stone, but a structure with a presence, one that interacts with those inside. For a survival shelter, such an effect may have been accidental but nonetheless profound. The storm-defying capacity of the pyramids also raises another possibility, that they were not merely passive shelters but active hubs of organisation. Communities could have gathered within their shadows during climate crises, storing food in nearby structures, coordinating migrations and preserving traditions. Their sheer visibility across the landscape, towering above the floodplain, would have drawn people from miles away. In this sense, the pyramid was both beacon and bastion, a symbol of endurance across chaos. Recent technologies continue to reveal anomalies. Muon tomography, a scanning technique that tracks cosmic particles, has detected hidden voids within the Great Pyramid. Their size and orientation suggest spaces unaccounted for in current maps. Are these collapsed chambers architectural redundancies or hidden shelters? Historians are still debating their significance. Some propose they were symbolic, others that they were practical. The debate is ongoing, and with each discovery the pyramid's mystery deepens. The engineering choices, the precision, the redundancy, and the mass all converge on one conclusion. These structures were built to endure against every conceivable threat. Whether their builders saw themselves as preserving kings or communities, the pyramids embody resilience. In the face of ice age storms, dust, wind, flood, and fire, they stand as bulwarks. Perhaps they were tombs, perhaps shelters, perhaps both. But to see them solely as ceremonial monuments is to miss their most striking feature, their defiance of destruction. Inside the pyramids, silence reigns. The outer bulk of stone, so monumental and commanding in the sunlight, gives way to narrow corridors and hidden chambers where sound is muffled, echoes linger strangely, and the air is still. To most archaeologists, these interiors are interpreted as funerary spaces, designed for burials and symbolic journeys into the afterlife. Yet their practical qualities, insulation, isolation, and shelter, deserve equal attention. When viewed through the lens of survival during the Ice Age, these silent chambers may reveal themselves as refuges, places where communities huddled against the chaos outside. The arrangement of the Great Pyramid's interior is peculiar when compared to other Egyptian tombs. Where the tombs in the Valley of the Kings are adorned with bright frescoes and dense hieroglyphs detailing mythic journeys, the Great Pyramid contains none. Its chambers are stark, stripped of ornamentation, the walls nothing more than smoothed stone. To those who see the pyramid as a tomb, this starkness is troubling. To those who imagine it as a shelter, however, it is logical. Decoration serves ritual, but it offers no defense against hunger, flood, or cold. The lack of ornamentation may therefore point to a function beyond funerary symbolism. The king's chamber, built of immense granite blocks, is centrally placed within the Great Pyramid. Its walls are massive, its ceiling supported by multiple layers of relieving chambers above. For a tomb, such redundancy seems excessive. For a shelter, it would have been essential. Within these walls, small groups of survivors could have found safety from storms raging outside. The granite, quarried far to the south, is incredibly resilient. Its density protects against moisture and temperature swings, while its hardness resists collapse. To build such a chamber at the pyramid's heart is to prioritize survival, whether of a king's remains or of living bodies. The so-called Queen's Chamber, lying deeper within the structure, adds another layer of mystery. Its purpose is unclear, for no burial has been found within it. Some scholars suggest it was a symbolic chamber, perhaps representing the womb of the underworld goddess. Others see in it a functional space, another, refuge, smaller, but accessible through narrow corridors. Its ventilation shafts, like those of the king's chamber, reach outward. Their practical use remains debated. If designed as air conduits, they would have allowed smoke to escape, oxygen to enter, and humidity to dissipate. In an enclosed space filled with people, these features would have been invaluable. The silence of the chambers invites speculation. Modern visitors often remark upon the acoustic qualities of the Grand Gallery, a steeply rising passage that leads toward the king's chamber. Its corbelled walls, narrowing as they rise, produce resonances when sound is made. Some engineers suggest this was unintentional, the byproduct of a structurally efficient design. Others argue it may have had symbolic or psychological purposes. Still others speculate that such acoustics could have calmed groups gathered in the darkness, creating a sense of order amid fear. In times of survival, psychology matters. A shelter that inspired awe could reinforce cohesion, discouraging panic and despair. The inner spaces of the pyramids are also strikingly difficult to access. Passageways are narrow, steep, and sometimes obstructed by blocking stones. For a tomb, This could deter robbers. For a shelter, it could deter intruders or help regulate entry. In times of chaos, controlling access to refuge would have been vital. A narrow passage can be defended by few, while a broad doorway cannot. In this sense, the pyramids are not only shelters but fortresses, designed to keep out more than weather alone. Historians are still debating whether the ancient Egyptians ever used these chambers in ways other than funerary. But scattered evidence suggests multi-purpose use of monumental structures was common in antiquity. Temples doubled as granaries, palaces as fortresses. Even in later periods, churches were built with crypts that served as refuges during invasions. The idea that the pyramid's interiors could have served a practical survival function, alongside symbolic meaning, is not unthinkable. The heat dynamics of the pyramid also invite reflection. Studies show that the interior of the Great Pyramid maintains a relatively stable temperature year-round, around 20 degrees Celsius. In a desert climate where outside temperatures swing dramatically between day and night, such stability would have been life-saving. During floods, storms, or sudden cold snaps, such as those that occurred during the Younger Dryas period, this steady climate would have made the pyramid interiors natural refuges. A tomb does not require such climate control. A shelter does. Stranger still are modern observations of electromagnetic anomalies inside the pyramids. Sensitive instruments detect unusual distributions of electrical energy within the chambers. While mainstream science attributes these to the geometry and mass of the structure interacting with Earth's natural fields, fringe interpretations suggest the pyramids may have had energetic purposes. If viewed through the survival lens, such properties may have been coincidental but beneficial. A structure that minimized lightning strikes or stabilized temperature through electromagnetic balance would have been invaluable. Historians are still debating whether ancient builders understood these effects or merely discovered them by accident. The silence of the pyramids has long fascinated visitors. Ancient Greek historians described them as vast, empty mountains. Medieval travellers told tales of hidden treasures within. Yet what is most striking is not what is present, but what is absent. No murals, no detailed inscriptions, no clear indication of funerary rituals. The emptiness is haunting, almost deliberate. If these interiors were meant to house kings for eternity, why leave them so barren? If they were meant to house the living through catastrophe, then barrenness is expected. Decoration is not needed in a refuge. Utility is. Archaeological surveys in recent decades have revealed small storage niches carved into passageways, sometimes overlooked by earlier explorers. These niches, too small for sarcophagi, may have held supplies, oil lamps, grain jars, or water vessels. Though no such items remain, the architectural suggestion lingers. If so, then the pyramids were not merely static symbols, but working shelters, ready to receive and sustain life. Another strange detail is the subterranean chamber beneath the Great Pyramid, rough-hewn compared to the polished chambers above. Its unfinished quality suggests either abandonment or a different purpose altogether. Some speculate it was symbolic, representing the underworld. Others argue it may have been a practical storage space, or even an early attempt to create a refuge that proved insufficient. Its roughness contrasts with the precision above, perhaps hinting at experimentation, an evolving design for survival. The silence of the pyramid interiors is not unique to Giza. Other pyramids across Egypt also contain stark chambers, devoid of elaborate decoration. If the pyramid form was copied by later dynasties for symbolic reasons, this starkness may reflect an inheritance of earlier design, functional spaces repurposed as tombs. Historians are still debating whether this represents continuity or coincidence. Yet the pattern is striking. The most monumental structures of ancient Egypt are strangely bare on the inside, as if their true purpose lay not in display but in endurance. The very act of entering a pyramid reinforces this impression. Unlike temples, which open outward with broad courtyards and towering pylons, pyramids turn inward. Their entrances are hidden, often blocked, their passageways descending into darkness. Temples invite the public. Pyramids conceal. In this concealment lies the logic of refuge. A shelter hides those within, protecting them from both danger and discovery. If the pyramids were Ice Age shelters, then their interiors would have served not only as protective chambers, but also as places of waiting. Weeks, perhaps months, could have passed while survivors endured storms outside. In that time, silence would have become companion, darkness constant. Fires might have flickered in the grand gallery, smoke rising into the shafts. Water jars lined the niches. Grain was rationed carefully. Families huddled together, listening to the stone hum with the force of the winds beyond. When at last the doors opened and light returned, those inside would step out into a changed world, carrying with them memory of survival. Whether this scenario occurred is unknown. Archaeology cannot easily prove or disprove such use. Yet the pyramid interiors, silent and enduring, invite such speculation. Their design is too functional, too stable, too precise to be dismissed as mere tombs. Their silence may conceal not emptiness but memory, the memory of a people who endured chaos by hiding within mountains of stone. The pyramids have always stood at the centre of debate. To many archaeologists, their purpose is simple. They are tombs for the pharaohs, monuments to kingship and power, grand stairways to eternity. Yet from the moment Europeans first crawled into their hidden corridors, the lack of typical funerary evidence has unsettled even the most cautious scholars. Where are the mummies? Where are the inscriptions detailing the afterlife, so common in other tombs? Why are the chambers so stark, the precision so excessive? It is in this debate, between those who see the pyramids as funerary and those who see them as something else, that the possibility of Ice Age shelters finds its footing. The mainstream view is firmly established. The pyramids were tombs. Ancient Egyptian culture revolved around the belief in an afterlife, where the king became one with the gods. Texts like the Pyramid Texts and later the Book of the Dead detail rituals, spells and symbols meant to guide the deceased into eternity. By this logic, the pyramids were more than graves. They were resurrection machines, designed to transform mortal rulers into divine beings. Their alignment with the stars, particularly Orion's belt and the North Star, is cited as symbolic evidence, representing the king's journey into the heavens. Egyptologists have defended this interpretation for more than a century, pointing to later pyramids that do contain inscriptions and burials as proof of continuity. But the evidence within the Great Pyramid remains uncooperative. No hieroglyphs line its walls, no burial goods remain. Only empty sarcophagi, stripped of decoration, sit in barren chambers. Some scholars argue that ancient looting explains this absence, yet tomb robbers, even in antiquity, rarely removed everything. In the Valley of the Kings, robbed tombs still yielded fragments of gold leaf, broken jars and fragments of funerary furniture. The Great Pyramid offers none. The emptiness is haunting, as though the structure never contained a burial at all. Historians are still debating whether robbery alone can account for such silence. The debate is sharpened by the pyramid's sheer engineering precision. If the sole purpose was to bury a body, why invest decades of labour and millions of tons of stone? Why such alignment with celestial north, accurate to within fractions of a degree? Why ventilation shafts carefully angled toward specific stars? Tombs elsewhere in Egypt, though elaborate, rarely demonstrate such obsessive accuracy. Critics argue that the engineering far exceeds funerary necessity. Proponents reply that pharaohs demanded divine perfection, and nothing less would do. The disagreement persists, a chasm between practicality and symbolism. Into this chasm enter alternative hypotheses. Some researchers suggest the pyramids were granaries, pointing to medieval traditions and biblical echoes of Joseph's storehouses. Others argue they were astronomical observatories, aligned to record celestial cycles. Still others, more controversially, propose they were power plants of a forgotten technology. And then there is the hypothesis considered here. that they were survival shelters designed not to honour the dead but to preserve the living through the chaos of climate upheaval. Each hypothesis confronts the same central mystery, the emptiness inside, and seeks to resolve it. Recent discoveries complicate the debate further. In 2017, Muon radiography revealed a massive hidden void above the Grand Gallery of the Great Pyramid. Its size rivals that of the largest known chambers, yet it remains sealed and unexplored. Egyptologists caution against speculation, but the void's existence stirs imaginations. Was it symbolic, a structural necessity, or a hidden chamber for supplies, or for people? The debate over purpose expands with each discovery, drawing in voices from geology, engineering, anthropology, and even physics. Historians are still debating whether such voids support or undermine the tomb theory. Archaeological context adds more fuel. Pyramids were not isolated phenomena. They arose within a cultural landscape where mastabas, flat-roofed tombs, already existed. Some scholars argue the pyramid was simply a logical extension of the mastaba, evolving into a stepped form under Djoser at Saqqara, then perfected into smooth-sided giants at Giza. Yet even here, anomalies persist. The step pyramid of Djoser is filled with intricate passageways and chambers far beyond the needs of a single burial. Its scale and complexity suggest experimentation with something more than tomb design. Perhaps it was a transitional form, where symbolic ritual merged with practical shelter. Historical sources are equally ambiguous. Ancient Greek writers like Herodotus described the pyramids as tombs, repeating what priests of their era told them. Yet their accounts contain exaggerations and contradictions. Medieval Arab historians, by contrast, often describe the pyramids as storehouses of knowledge built before the flood to preserve wisdom. One writer claimed they contained instruments of science, another that they held records of the stars. These stories may be myth, yet they echo the idea of preservation, not of corpses, but of civilization itself. One strange episode highlights the persistence of alternative views. In the early 19th century, British explorer Colonel Howard Vyse blasted his way into hidden chambers above the King's Chamber, discovering painted quarry marks that included the name of Khufu. Egyptologists hailed this as proof that Khufu commissioned the pyramid. Critics, however, have suggested the markings could have been forged, pointing to Vyse's desperation to make a discovery. Historians remain divided, though the mainstream accepts the inscriptions as genuine. Yet the controversy illustrates how fragile the evidence is, and how much of the pyramid story rests on interpretation rather than certainty. The debate over purpose is not merely academic, it shapes our understanding of human history. If the pyramids were tombs, they testify to the power of kingship and the centrality of religion in ancient Egypt. If they were shelters, they speak to human resilience, to survival strategies forged in the crucible of the Ice Age. If they were something else entirely, observatories, power plants, or symbolic mountains, they hint at lost knowledge and forgotten paradigms. Each interpretation tells a different story of human origins. The very persistence of debate reveals something important. The pyramids resist easy explanation. Unlike most monuments, they do not yield clear answers. Their emptiness is their enigma. Historians are still debating whether this reflects deliberate design or lost evidence. In the meantime, the pyramids continue to inspire speculation across disciplines, from geology to astronomy. What remains undeniable is their endurance. Whether tombs or shelters, they were built to last. No other structures from their era stand so intact. No other monuments dominate the landscape with such immovable presence. Even if the tomb theory is correct, the pyramids surpass funerary needs. Even if the shelter theory is wrong, it highlights the extraordinary adaptability of ancient peoples in the face of nature's wrath. The debate itself, unresolved and ongoing, may be the truest tribute to their builders. In the end, perhaps the pyramids were both tombs and shelters. In a world where climate shifted violently, the preservation of kingship and the preservation of life were not separate goals but intertwined. A pharaoh's survival was the survival of the state. His burial monument could also be the refuge of his people. The stark interiors, the hidden chambers, the redundant engineering, all may reflect a dual purpose. Historians are still debating whether such a synthesis is possible, but the possibility itself deepens the mystery. Thus the pyramids remain colossal, enigmatic, and contested. To some, tombs, to others, fortresses, to still others, time capsules of forgotten knowledge. Their silence offers no final word, only echoes, and so the debate endures, as enduring as the stone itself. Long before the first hieroglyph was carved, stories were already being told. Across deserts, mountains, and river valleys, early communities passed knowledge not in stone or ink, but in words, chants, songs, and tales spoken by firelight. Oral traditions preserve fragments of history that writing often forgets, carrying memories through centuries and even millennia. If the pyramids were born not solely from the dynasties of Egypt, but from older, deeper traditions forged in the Ice Age, then one might expect echoes of such survival in myth. Indeed, scattered among the world's oldest stories are hints of floods, fires, and refuges of stone. These stories may not prove anything, but they whisper possibilities that keep debate alive. In Egypt itself, ancient texts speak of cycles of destruction. Later inscriptions, known as the Coffin texts and Book of the Dead, detail apocalyptic scenarios in which the sun god withdraws his light or floods consume the world. Some traditions describe Atum, the creator, withdrawing creation into himself, leaving only water and chaos. Others speak of times when the gods unleashed burning destruction on humanity. Historians are still debating whether such tales are purely symbolic or preserve memories of real disasters, floods of the Nile beyond imagining, droughts that left the land desolate, or storms that darkened the skies for weeks. To communities clinging to survival in unstable climates, such events would not have been myth at all, but lived memory encoded into ritual. Beyond Egypt, similar stories recur. In Mesopotamia, the Epic of Gilgamesh recounts a great flood in which Utnapishtim survives by sealing himself in a massive vessel. In Greece, the myth of Deucalion and Pyrrha tells of humanity saved from a deluge by seeking refuge on high ground. In India, ancient texts describe Manu warned of a cosmic flood, building a vessel to endure it. Among indigenous cultures of the Americas, flood myths are equally common, often accompanied by references to mountains or caves where people hid until the waters receded. The global spread of such traditions suggests more than coincidence. They point to shared human experiences of catastrophic climate swings during the late Ice Age, events so traumatic they carved themselves into memory. Some anthropologists propose that megalithic structures themselves are physical expressions of such memories. Oral stories recall the disasters. The monuments embody the responses. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, with its massive pillars dating to nearly 12,000 years ago, seems less like a temple to deities than a gathering point for survivors, a stone-built memory of endurance. In Malta, underground hypogea, carved into bedrock, resemble not ceremonial spaces but refuges from storms. In this context, Egypt's pyramids may be understood as both monument and memory, stone echoes of survival strategies remembered and reinterpreted by later generations. A curious example of oral tradition merging with monumental architecture appears in Ethiopia. The highland communities of Aksum tell of underground chambers where ancestors survived times of great darkness. While these stories lack direct archaeological confirmation, they mirror themes found elsewhere. People seeking refuge underground or within stone when the world outside became hostile. Could the chambers within the pyramids be another form of this instinct, a survival inherited from forgotten times? Historians are still debating whether parallels across regions represent coincidence, cultural diffusion, or universal human response. In Egypt itself, the Sphinx adds a further layer to the story. While the pyramids stand in geometric precision, The Sphinx gazes eastward with a face that appears weathered far beyond dynastic Egypt. Some geologists argue that its erosion patterns suggest exposure to heavy rainfall, not the arid winds of the Sahara. If true, the Sphinx would date back to a wetter era, perhaps late in the Ice Age. Egyptian texts later associated it with guardianship, as though it watched over something of vital importance. Perhaps it guarded not tombs but shelters, protecting those who entered against chaos outside. Legends describe the Sphinx as keeper of riddles, challenging those who sought passage. In survival terms, this could symbolize restricted access, the control of who could enter and who must remain outside. Oral traditions also preserve hints of lost time. The Turin King List, a papyrus fragment from ancient Egypt, records dynasties stretching back far before the recognized pharaohs, including reigns of semi-divine beings that lasted thousands of years. Mainstream scholars dismiss these as mythical aberrations, but alternative historians wonder if they encode memories of earlier cultures, rulers of pre-dynastic civilizations whose knowledge was eventually lost. If so, the pyramids could be legacies of those forgotten ages, with oral tradition distorting them into the language of gods and kings. One peculiar element of Egyptian mythology stands out: the concept of Zep Tepi, the first time. It describes a golden age when gods walked among humans, when civilization flourished before decline. To some, it is purely myth, a creation story. To others, it suggests collective memory of an earlier epoch, possibly even the tail end of the Ice Age, when a now-forgotten culture thrived before catastrophe struck. If pyramids were shelters from that catastrophe, then later dynasties may have inherited them, interpreting their origins through the lens of myth. Historians are still debating whether Zep Tepi was invention or memory. Other oral traditions, even far from Egypt, recall encounters with great stone refuges. Among the Berber people of North Africa, folktales tell of stone-built sanctuaries where ancestors hid from the hot wind and the waters that returned. In the Canary Islands, legends of the Guanches spoke of caves where survivors of floods lived until the world dried. These stories echo the same theme: survival in stone. When compared with the pyramids, they suggest a wider cultural logic. Stone was permanence, stone was refuge. Modern science offers a curious parallel. Genetic studies show bottlenecks in human populations around 12,000 years ago, suggesting sharp reductions in numbers followed by expansions. These coincide with Younger Dryas, a sudden return to Ice Age conditions around 10,800 BCE. If populations shrank so dramatically, then only those with means of survival, whether in caves, mountains, or perhaps pyramids, would have endured. Oral traditions may thus preserve memories of these bottlenecks, retelling them as stories of floods and fires. The pyramids, in turn, may be their monumental counterparts. Strange stories also linger in folk memory close to our own time. Medieval chroniclers in the Middle East often claim the pyramids contained not corpses but hidden archives of knowledge from before the flood. Some wrote of scrolls sealed in stone, others of treasures of science, mathematics, and astronomy locked away for future generations. Though often dismissed as legend, these tales mirror oral traditions of survival, knowledge preserved against catastrophe. The pyramids, in this sense, are both shelter and library, holding not just people, but the wisdom needed to rebuild. Historians are still debating whether such accounts are pure myth or distorted memory of real practices of preservation. One odd episode of oral tradition intersecting with archaeology comes from the Nubian desert, where nomadic tribes told of giant stone houses built by their ancestors. For centuries these stories were dismissed as imagination. Yet aerial surveys in the 20th century revealed scattered megalithic structures buried beneath sand, their purpose still unknown. Here, oral memory proved more accurate than scholarly assumption. Could Egyptian traditions about survival, floods, and refuges also contain kernels of truth, pointing back to the pyramid's hidden purpose? The persistence of such myths across cultures is striking. While details differ, the core themes — catastrophe, survival, Refuge, repeat with uncanny similarity. Anthropologists suggest that oral memory can persist for astonishing lengths of time, sometimes thousands of years, preserving events like volcanic eruptions or floods with remarkable accuracy. Studies in Australia, for example, show that indigenous oral traditions recall coastal flooding events that occurred over 7,000 years ago, passed down in story without written record. If such endurance is possible, then Egyptian oral traditions of floods and shelters may indeed stretch back to the late Ice Age. The pyramids, then, may be seen as stone-bound oral traditions, where words faded, stone endured. They are monuments to memory itself, each block a syllable in a sentence of survival. Later dynasties may have reinterpreted them, but beneath layers of ritual and propaganda lies a deeper story, a story of human endurance against the violence of nature. The stones of the pyramids hold marks like faint signatures, chisel lines, grooves, and traces of tools left behind by those who shaped them. To most archaeologists, these marks are evidence of ordinary labour: copper chisels, dolerite pounders, and simple levers wielded by thousands of workers under the hot Egyptian sun. Yet when examined closely, some of these marks appear peculiar. They suggest techniques not easily explained by conventional tools, or they appear in places nearly impossible to reach with Bronze Age methods. If the pyramids were more than tombs, if they were survival shelters born of a desperate need to endure Ice Age disasters, then perhaps their construction required tools or knowledge that later eras could not replicate. These strange marks, scattered across the stone, may be whispers of forgotten methods. The most striking of these anomalies are found in granite. The king's chamber within the Great Pyramid is built of massive granite blocks, some weighing more than 50 tons. Granite, as hard as it is beautiful, cannot easily be cut with copper. Experimental archaeologists have tried to replicate the shaping of granite blocks, using the tools available to ancient Egyptians. Pounders of dolerite, hammered repeatedly against the surface. Progress is possible, but painfully slow. To shape one block by such means could take weeks, even months, requiring teams of men working constantly. And yet in the Great Pyramid, dozens of such blocks are precisely cut, their surfaces smoothed, their seams fitted to perfection. The sheer scale raises questions. Could it have been done with Bronze Age tools alone? Mainstream scholars say yes, given enough time and manpower. Critics argue that the precision and scale hint at methods we no longer understand. Among the most puzzling features are drill holes found in granite and basalt, particularly at Giza and nearby sites. Some of these holes spiral in ways that suggest the use of advanced drilling techniques, cutting with a speed or force beyond simple hand tools. In the 19th century, engineer Flinders Petrie examined one such hole and concluded it showed evidence of a drill advancing faster than copper could manage. Later studies attempted to replicate the marks, with mixed results. Some engineers argue that abrasive sand and copper drills could indeed produce such spirals, though slowly. Others insist the marks are too regular, too deep, to be explained away so easily. Historians are still debating whether these drill holes are anomalies or misunderstood evidence of lost methods. Chisel marks, too, tell curious stories. On casing stones once covering the Great Pyramid, faint parallel lines can still be seen. These lines are straight even, and regular, as though cut by a saw. But copper saws, even when supplemented with sand abrasives, tend to wear unevenly. The regularity suggests something more. Were harder materials used, now lost to time? Some suggest that iron tools, though rare, may have been available earlier than thought. Others suggest that percussive methods, pounders vibrating against the stone, could leave such marks. Still others point toward techniques now forgotten, a toolbox lost in the transition from Ice Age to Bronze Age. The very placement of certain blocks deepens the puzzle. How are stones weighing dozens of tons raised into chambers high inside the pyramid? The Grand Gallery, steep and narrow, appears designed for counterweight systems, with niches along its walls possibly holding beams or supports. Marks along these niches suggest wear, as though ropes or pulleys once ran there. Egyptologists typically describe them as architectural features. Engineers see them differently, as evidence of mechanical systems, perhaps forgotten by the time later dynasties copied the pyramid form. If the pyramids were shelters, built under urgent need, then innovation in lifting and placing blocks would have been essential. Marks left behind may be the faint remains of such innovations. Outside the pyramids, in quarries at Aswan and elsewhere, unfinished obelisks and blocks show further anomalies. One colossal obelisk, abandoned in place, lies partially carved from bedrock. Its sides reveal long striations, as though scraped by massive tools. Mainstream interpretation holds that dolerite pounders created these grooves. Alternative readings see them as evidence of cutting methods more efficient than pounding. The debate remains unresolved. Historians are still debating whether ancient workers possessed a level of engineering knowledge underestimated by modern scholarship. Even stranger are tool marks that appear unnecessary. Some casing stones show polishing so smooth it borders on the uncanny, achieved without modern abrasives. Others show seams so fine that even a razor blade cannot enter. For tombs, such effort seems extravagant. For shelters meant to endure Ice Age storms, however, precision would have been practical. Smooth seams prevented water infiltration. Tight joints resisted sand and dust. The tool marks, therefore, may not be signs of excess labour, but of urgent necessity. Stone crafted for survival, not ceremony. Stories from later eras complicate matters. Medieval Arab historians sometimes wrote of magic tools used in pyramid construction. Rods that could lift stone, powders that softened rock, or chants that vibrated blocks into place. These tales are often dismissed as legend, the imagination of cultures awed by monuments they could not explain. Yet they reflect an enduring sense that ordinary chisels could not account for such feats. The strange marks in granite, basalt and limestone gave rise to stories of forgotten science. In survival terms, perhaps such stories reflect lost memory of tools abandoned after catastrophe, remembered only as magic by later generations. Anomalous evidence also appears in the alignment of cut blocks. At the base of the Great Pyramid, blocks interlock with irregular precision, cut in multi-sided shapes that fit like a puzzle. Such methods are rare in Egypt, but common in other megalithic traditions, such as the walls of Cusco in Peru. Mainstream archaeology sees no connection. The techniques evolved independently. Yet the resemblance is uncanny, and the tool marks at both sites suggest shared goals, stability and resistance against earthquakes. Were these coincidences, or did distant cultures inherit a common logic of survival? Historians are still debating whether cross-cultural similarities in stonework reflect diffusion or universal solutions. Another puzzle lies in the absence of tools themselves. Despite the vast scale of pyramid building, few copper chisels or saw fragments have been found in contexts clearly linked to the work. If millions of blocks were shaped, where are the tools? Some argue they corroded beyond recognition. Others note that tool recycling would have been common, leaving little trace. Yet the scarcity remains peculiar. Could other materials, perishable or long lost, have been employed? Wood and stone tools leave few remains. If ancient builders used perishable composites, tools of organic fibre with embedded abrasives, they would leave little archaeological footprint. The strange marks might be the only surviving evidence. The pyramids also contain curious graffiti in hidden chambers. Workers' marks, names of crews, and directional notes appear scrawled in red ochre. While these confirm the involvement of human labour, they also raise questions. Why are some marks located in places nearly inaccessible, as though written before blocks were set? Why do others appear unfinished, as though abandoned mid-task? Such anomalies may simply reflect construction practices, but they also hint at interruptions, perhaps even crises, that altered the work. If the pyramids were built amid climate upheaval, disruptions would be expected, leaving strange and unfinished traces in stone. A strange, almost off-topic discovery was made in 2013 when archaeologists unearthed papyri near the Red Sea. These documents, belonging to an overseer named Mera, describe transporting limestone blocks for the Great Pyramid. While often cited as proof of pyramid construction under Khufu, the papyri also reveal logistical complexity rarely acknowledged. Boats ferried stone along canals, crews coordinated in shifts, and massive projects unfolded with meticulous planning. Yet even here, the papyri are silent on the most puzzling marks: the drill holes, the polished seams, the interlocking blocks. They confirm transport, but not the methods of shaping. The strangeness remains, unresolved by the only written testimony we possess. Thus, the pyramids speak through their scars: tool marks, drill holes, unfinished blocks, and inexplicable seams all hint at a story both ordinary and extraordinary. Ordinary, in that human labour left its traces as always. Extraordinary, in that some traces resist easy explanation. If the pyramids were survival shelters, then such marks may be the last evidence of urgent innovation, methods invented in a forgotten time of crisis, remembered only in the stone itself. Beneath the massive blocks and geometric precision of the pyramids lies a mystery that continues to deepen with each passing decade: the hidden chambers. For centuries, explorers assumed that the pyramids had given up all their secrets, their inner passages fully mapped. Yet new technologies, ground-penetrating radar, thermal imaging and muon radiography, have revealed voids and spaces concealed within the stone, their purposes unknown. These chambers, silent and inaccessible, expand the mystery of what the pyramids were truly built for. Were they symbolic, hidden for spiritual reasons? Or were they functional, designed to store supplies, preserve knowledge, or shelter people through times of catastrophe? If the pyramids were Ice Age refuges, the hidden chambers may be the strongest evidence yet. The story of hidden chambers begins with early exploration. In antiquity, the Great Pyramid was already sealed, its passages blocked by massive stones. Robbers and explorers forced their way in, chiselling through walls, tunnelling around barriers. They found chambers, the so-called kings and queens, the grand gallery, the subterranean room. Yet the arrangement of these spaces seemed oddly incomplete, as though something remained undiscovered. Even Herodotus, the Greek historian who visited Egypt in the 5th century BCE, wrote of hidden passageways and secret vaults, repeating tales told by priests. He described underground chambers connected to the Nile, where the pharaoh's body supposedly rested on an island surrounded by water. Archaeology has never confirmed this account, yet it reveals that even in ancient times, people suspected the pyramids contained secrets beyond the obvious. In modern times, suspicions grew with new surveys. The subterranean chamber beneath the Great Pyramid, carved directly into bedrock, looks unfinished, its walls rough, its ceiling low. Some interpret it as an abandoned burial chamber, others as symbolic representation of the underworld. But if the pyramid was a shelter, the subterranean chamber may have been a prototype, an initial refuge cut into rock before more refined chambers were built above. The fact that it lies deep beneath ground level suggests defense against flood or fire. Its unfinished state may mean it proved insufficient, prompting builders to expand upward into the heart of the pyramid itself. In the late 20th century, radar scans revealed anomalies behind the walls of the Queen's Chamber. Narrow shafts extending outward were probed with small robots. These machines discovered tiny doors sealed with copper fittings, beyond which further voids may lie. The presence of such doors raises questions. Why build sealed passages leading to hidden spaces never meant to be accessed? If symbolic, they might represent gates to the stars or to the afterlife. If practical, they might hide storage niches or small refuges. The copper fittings themselves are curious. They serve no obvious symbolic purpose but would have been functional in locking or sealing. Historians are still debating whether such features indicate ritual or function. The most dramatic discovery came in 2017, when muon radiography, using cosmic particles to detect density differences, revealed a vast hidden void above the Grand Gallery of the Great Pyramid. This space, larger than an aircraft hangar, had gone undetected for millennia. Its purpose remains entirely unknown. Egyptologists caution against speculation, suggesting it may be a structural cavity relieving weight. Yet its size and placement invite questions. If purely structural, why such enormity? Could it instead be a hidden chamber designed for storage, or even a concealed hall where groups of people could gather during crisis? The debate continues, unresolved. Across Egypt, other pyramids also hide secrets. The Bent Pyramid at Dashur contains two separate internal systems of chambers and corridors, linked by hidden passages. Scholars argue this was experimental architecture, a transitional step in pyramid evolution. But if viewed as shelter, it looks like redundancy. Two systems built in case one failed, ensuring survival. Marks of blocked passages suggest deliberate concealment, perhaps to hide supplies or sanctuaries from those unworthy of entry. Similarly, the step pyramid of Djoser at Sahara contains a labyrinth of corridors, some filled with stone plugs designed to seal them permanently. To robbers, these are obstacles. To survivors, they may have been security, defences against intruders or floods. Legends about hidden chambers also abound. Medieval accounts often describe the pyramids as storehouses of knowledge built before the Great Flood. According to some writers, the pyramids contained books of wisdom, carved on stone tablets, sealed in chambers deep within. Others claim they held astronomical instruments, maps of the stars, even relics of a lost age. While archaeology has found none of these, the persistence of such legends is curious. They reflect a widespread belief that the pyramids concealed something essential, not merely bodies of kings. Such beliefs may have roots in oral traditions stretching back to Ice Age survival, when hidden chambers truly did protect vital goods and knowledge. Strange anomalies also appear in the stories of explorers. In the 19th century, some reported hearing echoes and vibrations in the pyramids, as though spaces beyond the walls resonated unseen. One account described a hollow sound when stone was struck, suggesting voids behind. Later surveys confirmed these impressions, revealing cavities and passages beyond mapped areas. Such sensations gave rise to speculation of entire hidden cities beneath the pyramids, myths that exaggerate but perhaps hint at kernels of truth. Hidden chambers carry implications beyond archaeology. If the pyramids were survival shelters, then these concealed spaces may have stored food, water, or tools. Narrow shafts could have supplied air, while sealed doors kept contents safe from decay. Hidden caches of seeds or records could have preserved civilization's foundation through catastrophe. Even if never used, their presence alone would show preparation, foresight against disaster. In this interpretation, the pyramids are not only monuments, but blueprints for resilience. Historians are still debating whether such an interpretation is too speculative. Some argue the voids are purely structural, byproducts of engineering. Others counter that the builders, so precise in their alignments and measurements, would not have left accidental cavities of such scale. Nothing in the pyramid seems unintentional. If voids exist, they exist for purpose. The question remains, what purpose? Global parallels deepen the mystery. In Central America, Maya pyramids often contain multiple hidden chambers and tunnels, some of which were rediscovered only by modern archaeologists. At Teotihuacan in Mexico, a tunnel beneath the Pyramid of the Sun was found sealed with blocks, filled with offerings but also evidence of water channels. Scholars debate whether it was ritual or functional. In Malta, underground temples contain hidden chambers linked by narrow passages, their purpose still uncertain. The recurring theme is striking. Across cultures, Pyramids and megaliths often hide secret spaces, as if secrecy itself was part of survival. One strange, almost off-topic event occurred in 1997 when a Japanese research team used radar to scan the area around the pyramids. They claimed to detect anomalies suggesting tunnels beneath Giza, connecting pyramids to the Sphinx and beyond. Their findings were controversial, dismissed by some as misinterpretation, but embraced by others as evidence of a vast hidden network. If true, such tunnels could represent not tomb corridors, but subterranean refuges, a labyrinth for those seeking shelter. No definitive exploration has confirmed them, but the idea persists, entwined with myths of hidden worlds beneath the sands. What lies within the hidden chambers may never be known. Egypt's authorities are cautious, often restricting exploration to protect monuments. Some accuse them of withholding discoveries, fueling conspiracy theories. Others defend the caution, arguing that premature intrusion could destroy fragile evidence. The result is frustration and fascination in equal measure. Each new void detected, each door revealed sparks speculation. What if the chambers are filled not with treasures of gold, but with relics of survival, grain jars, tools, or tablets recounting cataclysm? What if the pyramids are vaults of memory, sealed until a future crisis demands their opening? The pyramids stand as if daring humanity to guess. Their visible chambers are already enigmatic. Their hidden ones push the mystery further. Whether symbolic or practical, they embody the human instinct to conceal, to protect, to endure. If the pyramids were Ice Age shelters, then the hidden chambers may represent their most human feature. The impulse to prepare for a future unseen, to hide away what is most precious in stone against the storms of time. The pyramids of Egypt are not alone. Across the world, stone monuments rise in similar forms, echoing each other across oceans and millennia. Scholars often insist these similarities are coincidence, the product of human ingenuity solving similar problems in isolation. Yet when viewed through the lens of survival, the parallels take on new meaning. If the pyramids were shelters, fortresses against Ice Age storms and floods, then other megalithic structures might have served the same role. Across continents, we may be looking at a global tradition of survival architecture, each culture leaving behind its own stone memory of endurance. In Mesopotamia, the Ziggurats towered above cities like mountains of mud brick. The Ziggurat of Ur, built around 2100 BCE, is the most famous example, its stepped terraces rising toward the heavens. Historians generally interpret ziggurats as temples, connecting earth to sky, places where gods could descend to meet humans. Yet their form also had practical advantages. Built on raised platforms, they withstood floods that periodically swept across the flat Mesopotamian plains. Communities could take refuge upon their upper levels when rivers burst their banks. In this sense, ziggurats were both temples and survival platforms, spiritual centres that doubled as sanctuaries. Their resemblance to pyramids is striking, not smooth-sided mountains of stone, but terraced, functional bastions against the chaos of nature. Far to the west, in Central America, pyramids rose again. At Teotihuacan in Mexico, the Pyramid of the Sun dominates the ancient city, its bulk rivaling that of Giza. Its construction around the 1st century CE postdates the Egyptian pyramids by millennia, yet its form is familiar. Massive, sloping sides, oriented towards celestial events. Beneath it, archaeologists discovered a tunnel filled with offerings, jade, shells, even liquid mercury. Mainstream interpretations see ritual, an underworld recreated in miniature. But the tunnel also resembles a hidden refuge, sealed against intrusion. At other sites, such as Chichen Itzá, pyramids often contained earlier structures within, smaller pyramids encased inside larger ones. Historians are still debating whether this represents symbolic rebirth or a practical attempt to reinforce shelters over time, layering protection as climates or society shifted. In South America, the Andean civilizations built stone walls of uncanny precision. At Sacsayhuaman in Cusco, massive blocks fit together with such tightness that even earthquakes could not dislodge them. Their interlocking forms with irregular sides echo the base courses of the Great Pyramid. For the Inca, these walls were fortresses, but their origins may be older, remnants of pre-Inca cultures that survived in the mountains. High above flood levels, these walls suggest survival against seismic and climatic threats. Tool marks at Cusco resemble those seen at Giza. Smooth seams, complex cuts, and joints too perfect for simple stone tools. If the pyramids were shelters, then the Andean walls may have been their mountain counterparts. Across the Mediterranean, Malta holds another set of enigmas. The megalithic temples of Hargachim and Menajdra, built more than 5,000 years ago, predate the Egyptian pyramids. They are circular, with stone slabs forming chambers roofed by massive lintels. Beneath them, the hypogeum of Halsaflieni extends into the earth, a labyrinth of underground halls and passages. Historians describe it as a temple or necropolis, but its design resembles a refuge. Hidden from storms, insulated against heat and cold, the hypogeum could easily have sheltered hundreds during catastrophe. Some chambers resonate with sound at specific frequencies, leading some to speculate on ritual use. Yet resonance could also calm groups gathered in darkness, reinforcing order amid fear. If the pyramids were above-ground fortresses, Malta's hypogea were underground counterparts, stone shelters in different form. In Asia, megalithic traditions also speak to survival. In India, stepwells carved into the earth served not only as reservoirs but as shelters against heat. Their stairways descended deep, lined with stone walls that maintained coolness in blazing summers. In China, stepped earthen pyramids near Xi'an House, tombs of emperors, but local legends describe them as refuges built by ancient kings during floods. Some still stand, covered in vegetation, mute reminders of survival strategies that parallel those of Egypt. Even in the Pacific, echoes persist. On Micronesian islands, stone cities such as Nan Madol were built atop artificial platforms in the ocean. Some suggest ritual purpose, others political. Yet their construction, stone against sea, suggests adaptation to flooding. Oral traditions of the region speak of ancestors building refuges as waters rose. Such stories resonate with Ice Age memories of coastlines swallowed by seas, when rising oceans force communities to adapt or perish. Global parallels raise an uncomfortable question. Were these structures built independently, or do they reflect a shared legacy of survival knowledge carried across continents? Mainstream scholars insist on independent invention, citing lack of contact between regions. But alternative thinkers argue that memories of Ice Age catastrophes, floods, storms, and seismic upheavals could have inspired similar responses everywhere. When faced with nature's violence, human ingenuity often converges on similar forms: stone mass, geometric stability, hidden chambers. Whether coincidence or connection, the result is the same: pyramids, mounds, and fortresses repeating across the globe. One curious off-topic event illustrates how such parallels capture imaginations. In 1945, an American pilot flying over China reported seeing a Great White Pyramid, supposedly larger than Giza. Photographs were taken, but the site has never been confirmed. Some claim it was an emperor's tomb, others dismiss it as myth. Yet the story fed into a broader narrative of global pyramids, each echoing the others, as if the shape itself was encoded into human survival instinct. Historians are still debating whether the Great White Pyramid exists, but the tale reflects the allure of parallels. Wherever one looks, pyramids seem to rise. Flood myths strengthen this interpretation. As discussed earlier, oral traditions around the world recount deluges and refuges. Many link survival to mountains or stone shelters. In Mesoamerica, the Aztec myth of Coxcox describes humanity surviving in a hollowed tree or cave. In the Andes, tales tell of Viracocha saving people in caves during floods. In Polynesia, myths recall canoes carrying ancestors to new lands as seas rose. These stories mirror the architecture, refuges carved in stone, layered against water and wind. The pyramids of Egypt may be one chapter in this global saga of survival. Archaeologists point to mounds as well. In North America, cultures of the Mississippi built massive earthen pyramids, like Monk's Mound at Cahokia. These served as ceremonial centres, but their height also provided refuge from floods on the Mississippi plain. Built of earth rather than stone, they eroded faster, yet their function as raised sanctuaries is clear. Like the Ziggurats, they combined ritual with survival. Historians are still debating whether such parallels truly support alternative theories. Skeptics argue that pyramids are simply the most stable way to build tall structures without advanced materials. Others counter that similarities extend beyond shape, into hidden chambers, tool marks, orientation to stars, and myths of catastrophe. The question remains open, each side defending its interpretation. If one accepts the survival hypothesis, then the global parallel suggests something profound. Humans everywhere face the chaos of the late Ice Age, and everywhere they turn to stone. Stone endured when wood rotted and earth crumbled. Stone preserved memory, function, and myth. The pyramids of Egypt, then, are not anomalies but part of a worldwide pattern, each culture leaving behind its own stone fortress against extinction. The parallels do not prove connection, but they amplify possibility. They remind us that the pyramids cannot be understood in isolation. They are part of a broader human story, a global dialogue between memory and survival. Each pyramid, ziggurat, mound, or hippogem is a chapter in the book of resilience, written not in words but in stone. The pyramids are not hollow shells, they breathe. Narrow shafts climb through their cores, channels cut into stone in ways that seem both purposeful and puzzling. Engineers have long marvelled at the way these structures regulate temperature, maintain stability, and channel air. If they were tombs, the complexity seems excessive. If they were survival shelters, however, then airflow, climate control, and even the harnessing of energy may have been essential. To consider the pyramids through this lens is to see them not only as monuments of stone but as machines of environment, built to tame heat and air in a hostile world. Modern measurements reveal that the temperature inside the Great Pyramid remains astonishingly stable, around 20 degrees Celsius, regardless of the searing heat of the desert outside. This stability is not accidental. It results from the mass of stone, which absorbs heat during the day and releases it slowly at night, smoothing out fluctuations. In practical terms, this means the pyramid is a natural climate regulator. For a tomb, this would serve little purpose. For a shelter, it would be invaluable. When the Ice Age gave way to abrupt warming and cooling cycles, with temperatures swinging wildly in decades, a structure capable of maintaining equilibrium could mean the difference between life and death. The shafts extending from the king's and queen's chambers complicate the mystery. Discovered in the 19th century, these narrow tunnels run upward at sharp angles, reaching the pyramid's outer faces. Initially dismissed as symbolic soul shafts, aligned towards stars to guide the pharaoh's spirit, they nevertheless serve a practical function. They allow air to move. Experiments have shown that when wind passes over the pyramid's surface, it creates pressure differentials that could draw air through the shafts, ventilating the chambers inside. In survival terms, this would prevent suffocation, clear smoke from torches, and maintain livable conditions. Historians are still debating whether the shafts were deliberately functional or purely symbolic. Perhaps they were both. Ancient builders often merged ritual and practical needs, disguising survival functions in sacred symbolism. The Grand Gallery, with its corbelled roof soaring high above, also suggests climate-conscious design. Its steep passage may have acted as a chimney, allowing hot air to rise upward and away from chambers below. When filled with torches, the gallery could have drawn smoke out, leaving breathable air. The gallery's niches, running along its sides, may have held wooden beams or devices for managing flow. Some engineers propose that counterweights ran here to lift blocks. Others suggest the design enhanced airflow. Whatever the case, the gallery seems more than a passage. It is a system, a space that channels forces, air, weight, and sound in deliberate ways. Thermal imaging studies in recent years have revealed unusual heat signatures on the pyramid's outer blocks. Some areas retain warmth longer than others, suggesting cavities or channels beneath. Egyptologists caution that natural variations in stone can explain this, yet the possibility of hidden thermal systems lingers. Could the pyramids have been designed to manage not only air but also heat? If survivors sheltered within, heat distribution would have been critical. Fires must be maintained without suffocating smoke. Food must be preserved without spoiling. Temperature balance would have been a constant concern. Speculation grows stranger when energy enters the discussion. In 2018, a team of physicists published findings that the Great Pyramid's internal structure could theoretically focus electromagnetic energy. Using models, they showed that the pyramid can concentrate radio waves in its internal chambers and at its base. They did not suggest this was intentional, only that the geometry produces such effects. Yet for those who see the pyramid as more than tomb, the discovery hints at possibilities. Could ancient builders have exploited natural energies of Earth, even unconsciously, to stabilize their shelters? Historians are still debating whether this is scientific coincidence or a clue to forgotten knowledge. Ancient myths occasionally hint at such possibilities. Egyptian texts describe the pyramid not as inert stone but as a living entity, a stairway of light. Legends claim that pyramids glowed in the sun, their limestone casing reflecting like mirrors. Some say they harnessed the sun's energy, focusing it like a beacon. While these tales are often dismissed as poetic exaggeration, they may preserve faint memories of the pyramid's environmental properties. A structure that stayed cool in heat, resonated with sound, and focused energy would indeed have seemed alive to those who sought shelter within. Airflow, too, has psychological value. In sealed chambers, still air breeds panic. Movement reassures. Survivors in caves and bunkers often describe air circulation as essential, not only physically, but mentally. The shafts of the pyramids, narrow and hidden, may have provided this. The faint whisper of wind in stone, the cool flow of air through darkness could calm the fearful. In a time of catastrophe, dust storms, floods, or fire, the pyramid's breathing chambers may have been as important for spirit as for body. Comparisons to other survival structures reinforce the idea. In Cappadocia, Turkey, vast underground cities were carved into soft volcanic rock. These contained ventilation shafts descending hundreds of feet, keeping air fresh for thousands of people. Historians agree they were refuges, places of safety during invasions or disaster. The pyramids, though above ground, may have served similar functions. Their shafts, like those of Cappadocia, transformed stone from prison to sanctuary. Even more intriguing is the possibility that airflow was controlled deliberately. Some researchers suggest that plugs and doors within the pyramids allowed shafts to be sealed or opened, adjusting circulation. The mysterious doors discovered by robotic probes in the Queen's Chamber shafts, sealed with copper fittings, may support this. Were these symbolic gates, or primitive vents, controlled to regulate conditions inside? Historians are still debating their purpose. The ambiguity allows both interpretations to coexist, ritual and survival entwined. The role of water cannot be ignored. Beneath the Great Pyramid lies the subterranean chamber, rough and unfinished, connected to descending passages. Some have proposed it once held water, perhaps from the Nile or from underground aquifers. If true, it could have acted as a reservoir, cooling the pyramid and providing drinking water during Refuge. Engineers note that water and airflow together can create evaporative cooling, a simple form of climate control. In survival shelters, Such systems are essential. In tombs, they are unnecessary. The presence of such features adds weight to the hypothesis. A curious, almost off-topic incident occurred in 1993 when Rudolf Gantenbrink's robot, Upuaut 2, explored one of the Queen's chamber shafts. It discovered the tiny door with copper fittings, then halted. Years later, another probe drilled through and found a small empty space, followed by yet another sealed door beyond. The finding baffled archaeologists. Why build multiple sealed chambers in a narrow shaft never meant to be entered? If symbolic, it is elaborate. If functional, it may reflect attempts to control airflow or seal supplies. The strangeness lies in the effort. So much work for something invisible to all but the builders. Historians are still debating whether such hidden systems served ritual or survival. The pyramids may even echo principles found in nature. Termite mounds in Africa regulate internal climate with astonishing efficiency, channeling air through vents to maintain stable temperature and humidity. Engineers study them for sustainable design. The pyramids, massive stone mounds, seem to achieve similar balance. Whether by accident or design, they embody principles of environmental control. If built as shelters, this convergence with nature is no accident but a triumph of observation, humanity learning from Earth itself how to endure. In this view, the pyramids are more than monuments. They are environmental machines, stabilizing climate, circulating air, channeling water, and perhaps even energy. Their builders may not have described them in scientific terms, but they achieved effects that modern engineers recognize. Whether tombs, temples, or shelters, the pyramid's mastery of environment cannot be denied. They breathe, they balance, they endure. And so, the debate continues. Were the shafts meant for souls or for smoke? Were the chambers built for gods or for people? Historians are still debating, evidence pulled between ritual and function. Yet the facts remain. Inside the pyramids, temperature holds steady, air flows, and stone resonates. In a world of Ice Age storms, such qualities would have been priceless. Perhaps after all, the pyramids were not only places of death, but sanctuaries of life. Catastrophe is written into Earth's memory. Ice cores drilled from Greenland and Antarctica reveal sudden spikes and plunges in temperature, shifts that unfolded not over centuries but sometimes in a single human lifetime. Among these events, the Younger Dryas stands out, a dramatic return to glacial cold around 10,800 BCE, lasting more than 1,000 years before the climate abruptly warmed again. For those alive in that age, catastrophe was not myth, but reality. Storms raged, rivers changed course, species vanished, and communities struggled to adapt. If the pyramids were conceived in this crucible of instability, then they may embody not only survival, but continuity, the preservation of culture through disaster. The Younger Dryas is often described as one of history's greatest mysteries. It began suddenly, with temperatures in the northern hemisphere plunging in a matter of decades. Glaciers advanced again, rainfall patterns shifted, and dust storms swept across continents. Scholars debate the cause. Some propose a comet impact, others a massive freshwater flood into the North Atlantic that disrupted ocean currents. Whatever its trigger, the effect was global. The Sahara, which had been wetter and greener, turned hostile. The Nile's flow became erratic. Communities once secure found themselves vulnerable. It is within this unstable world that the idea of stone fortresses, pyramids, becomes plausible. Archaeological evidence supports widespread upheaval. Around 12,000 years ago, many large animal species vanished. Mammoths, mastodons, saber-toothed cats. Human populations contracted in some regions, rebounded in others. Sites like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey suggest organized societies emerged rapidly at this time, as if driven by urgency. Enormous megaliths were erected just as the Younger Dryas waned, hinting at a cultural response to disaster. Were these monuments simply ritual, or were they part of a broader survival strategy? Historians are still debating whether the sudden rise of complex structures reflects newfound religion, or an attempt to anchor fragile societies in a world that seemed ready to collapse. Egypt's Nile Valley was not spared. Geological studies of Nile sediments reveal sudden fluctuations in water levels around the end of the Ice Age. At times, the river surged with destructive floods. At others, it shrank, leaving farmland barren. Communities dependent on its rhythm would have faced ruin. Oral traditions, later encoded into Egyptian myths, recall floods that covered the land and fires from the sky. These could be symbolic, but they may also reflect memories of Younger Dryas catastrophe, passed down for millennia. In this light, the pyramids may have served as stabilizers, shelters where people, seeds, and knowledge could endure when nature turned hostile. The very mass of the pyramids speaks to continuity. A shelter of wood or mud brick might last a generation. Stone endures millennia. If catastrophe cycles were expected, then permanence was essential. The pyramids, planted deep into bedrock, could outlast storms, quakes, and floods, preserving a cultural nucleus even if surrounding villages fell. In this interpretation, they were not just shelters but anchors, continuity made visible in stone. Survivors who emerged after disaster would find them unchanged, symbols of stability in a broken world. Comparisons with other ancient refuges reinforce this idea. In Anatolia, Çatalhöyük, one of the earliest known cities, shows evidence of densely packed houses with few entrances, perhaps designed for collective defense against harsh environments. In Malta, underground hypogea provided continuity through climate shifts. In Peru, high-altitude sites offered protection from floods below. Each of these suggests continuity, people building not only for survival in the moment, but for preservation of community through generations. The pyramids fit within this pattern, their colossal form ensuring that continuity was guaranteed not for centuries but for ages. The Younger Dryas also left scars visible in geology. Some researchers point to evidence of massive flooding events, particularly in North America, where the sudden release of glacial meltwater carved immense channels known as the scablands. Others identify signs of cometary impacts, microspherules, platinum layers, and carbon-rich sediments that may indicate firestorms. Though debated, such findings suggest catastrophe on a scale unimaginable today. If survivors endured, they would have clung to any shelter capable of withstanding such extremes. Could the pyramids have been conceived by people carrying memory of these disasters, determined to build structures that would never fall to storm or flood again? Historians are still debating whether such links are credible or speculative. Egyptian myth itself hints at cycles of catastrophe and renewal. The story of Osiris, dismembered and reassembled, can be read as metaphor for cultural survival through destruction. The tale of Ra, retreating each night into the underworld to battle chaos, mirrors the cycle of death and rebirth. These myths, though later formalized, may encode older memories of catastrophe. The pyramids, rising as mountains of stone, symbolize the same theme: continuity through cycles, rebirth after collapse. Stranger still is the alignment of pyramids with celestial cycles. The Giza pyramids are oriented not only to the cardinal directions, but also to the stars of Orion's belt, which shift over millennia due to precession. Some researchers argue that the alignments reflect skies not of Khufu's time, but of earlier epochs, perhaps around 10,500 BCE, at the onset of the Younger Dryas. If true, this would suggest that the pyramids were conceived in relation to catastrophe cycles, their design anchored to cosmic markers of continuity. Mainstream scholars caution against such interpretations, noting uncertainties in alignment and dating. Yet the debate persists, unresolved. The notion of continuity also explains the pyramid's redundancy. Multiple chambers, multiple shafts, multiple levels of protection, all suggest design against failure. A tomb needs only one chamber. A shelter designed for continuity needs backups. If one passage collapses, another remains. If one chamber floods, another survives. The pyramids embody this redundancy, their builders anticipating disaster and ensuring survival beyond it. A curious, almost off-topic detail reinforces the theme. In the 1990s, archaeologists studying hieroglyphs at Abydos noted depictions of what appeared to be boats carried atop mountains. Some interpreted them as symbolic vessels to the afterlife. Others suggested they recall real practices, boats hauled to higher ground for preservation against floods. The image is strikingly similar to myths of arks and refuges worldwide. It suggests continuity, the deliberate preservation of vessels, tools, and knowledge through catastrophe. The pyramids, in this sense, may have been arks of stone, designed to carry culture itself across the stormy seas of the Ice Age. Historians are still debating whether Egypt's sudden rise to civilization was continuity or invention. Did the dynasties emerge independently, or did they inherit remnants of earlier cultures that survived catastrophe? Mainstream archaeology favours independent development, citing evidence of gradual agricultural transition along the Nile. Yet anomalies, like the sudden appearance of advanced architecture and astronomical knowledge, leave open the possibility of inheritance. If pyramids were Ice Age shelters, then dynastic Egypt may have grown from seeds preserved within them. Continuity was not only physical but cultural, a bridge from forgotten ages into history. In this interpretation, catastrophe did not destroy humanity, it transformed it. Survivors emerged with memories encoded in myth, architecture, and ritual. They built monuments not only for gods and kings, but for the continuity of life itself. The pyramids are thus both scar and beacon. Scar of the chaos that birthed them, beacon of the resilience that carried humanity forward. Water has always been both gift and terror in the Nile Valley. Each year, the river rose and fell with the rains of distant highlands, bringing fertile silt that sustained Egyptian civilization. Too little water meant famine, too much meant destruction. It is unsurprising then that myths, rituals, and architecture all reflect reverence for the Nile's cycles. Yet when the pyramids are considered not as tombs, but as Ice Age shelters, water takes on new meaning. Floods, storms, and rising seas may not only have shaped their design, but may even have been the very reason they were built. Geological studies of the Giza Plateau reveal signs of erosion inconsistent with its current climate. The Sphinx, carved from bedrock, bears deep vertical fissures and rounded weathering patterns that some geologists attribute to heavy rainfall. Egypt has not experienced such rains in the historic period, but it did during pluvial phases at the end of the Ice Age. If the Sphinx was carved then, its neighbour, the pyramids, may also date from a wetter era. This interpretation is controversial. Most Egyptologists insist the Sphinx dates to the Old Kingdom. Yet if rainfall carved its body, then catastrophic storms and floods once swept the plateau, perhaps inspiring the construction of stone refuges to resist them. Historians are still debating whether this erosion is wind or water, symbolism or survival clue. The subterranean chamber of the Great Pyramid reinforces this connection. Cut deep into bedrock, its floor uneven, it seems unfinished. Yet its location below ground suggests flood resistance. Some researchers propose it acted as a sump, collecting water seeping from the plateau. Others see it as symbolic of the underworld. But if the pyramid was a shelter, the subterranean chamber could have been a reservoir storing water for survival. In times of flood, it may also have served as a drain, diverting water away from chambers above. Its unfinished look may simply reflect a utilitarian purpose, function, not form. Legends from ancient writers also emphasize water. Herodotus claimed the Great Pyramid contained channels connected to the Nile, surrounding the pharaoh's body with water. While unconfirmed, the idea is intriguing. Could underground passages once linked pyramid interiors to the river, either intentionally or through natural flooding? If so, then the pyramids were not just dry monuments, but structures interacting with water, designed to channel and resist it. Archaeological surveys in recent decades have found evidence of harbours and channels near Giza, suggesting the pyramids once stood amid a water-rich environment. Their causeways may have doubled as levees, guiding floodwaters safely away. Across the ancient world, water and survival structures intertwine. In Mesopotamia, ziggurats rose above floodplains, their upper terraces providing refuge when rivers overflowed. In India, stepwells both stored water and sheltered communities from heat. In Central America, Maya pyramids incorporated reservoirs and aqueducts. These parallels suggest a global response, monumental architecture as a hedge against unpredictable. Water dot the pyramids of Egypt, planted beside the Nile, may be part of the same tradition. If the Ice Age ended with catastrophic floods, as some evidence suggests, then building in stone against water was survival logic. The myth of the Great Flood is nearly universal. From Mesopotamia's Epic of Gilgamesh to the Hebrew account of Noah, from Indian tales of Manu to Native American flood stories, cultures recall waters rising and humanity surviving in vessels or mountains. Egypt, too, preserved similar traditions. Some texts describe Nun, the primordial waters, engulfing the world. Others speak of the goddess Sekhmet nearly destroying humanity in a flood of blood. These may be symbolic, but they mirror lived experience of sudden inundation. Survivors may have encoded memory of catastrophic Nile floods into myth, just as they encoded protection against such floods into stone. Geological evidence for ancient flooding in Egypt is compelling. Fossilized river channels crisscross the desert, remnants of wetter eras. Lake sediments in the eastern Sahara show that vast bodies of water once filled basins now dry. When monsoons shifted northward during the African humid period, rainfall could have turned the Sahara into a lush savanna, feeding rivers that overwhelmed the Nile. As climates flipped abruptly, these rivers dried, leaving famine. Flood and drought alternated with terrifying speed. In such a world, the pyramid's sloping sides, massive bulk and raised entrances would have been defences. Floodwaters would slide down their flanks, elevated chambers would stay dry. Supplies stored inside could preserve life when farmlands drowned or withered. Curiously, water also appears in the pyramid's internal design. Some engineers argue that channels and shafts within the Great Pyramid could have interacted with underground aquifers, creating hydraulic pressure. Though controversial, experiments suggest water movement beneath the pyramid might generate vibrations or energy, perhaps even enhancing airflow. If intentional, this would show astonishing knowledge of hydraulics. If accidental, it nevertheless reveals the pyramid's deep connection with water. In survival terms, such systems may have stabilized conditions inside, cooling chambers or preventing collapse during floods. Historians are still debating whether such interpretations are scientific or speculative. An almost off-topic but fascinating story emerges from the Famine stela, an inscription on Sehel Island near Aswan. It describes a 7-year drought during the reign of Pharaoh Djoser, when the Nile failed to flood. Djoser, advised by his priest Imhotep, restored temples and ordered works to appease the gods. Mainstream interpretations see this as religious propaganda, yet it also reflects real memory of climate crisis. The pyramids, begun under Djoser, may thus represent architectural response to famine and flood alike, a strategy to preserve continuity amid extremes. The role of water in Egyptian religion further blurs boundaries between ritual and survival. Temples contained sacred lakes, reflecting the primordial Nun. Priests performed purification with water, yet these practices may echo practical realities, water as cleanser, preserver, and necessity. The pyramids, towering beside the Nile, symbolize not only ascent to the sky, but also resilience against the flood. In a world where inundation could wipe away entire villages, stone mountains were insurance. Later dynasties reused pyramids and built new ones, but the association with water persisted. Some were placed near ancient lake beds or rivers, others incorporated channels and moats. The symbolism of water as life and death never faded. If pyramids were first conceived as survival against Ice Age floods, then later generations reinterpreted them as spiritual protection against the waters of the underworld. Ritual replaced practicality, but memory remained. A strange anecdote comes from medieval Arab chroniclers who describe the pyramids as granaries built to survive a great flood. They insisted that ancient kings, forewarned of catastrophe, stored grain within. While historians dismiss this as myth, it resonates with the survival hypothesis. If floods were expected, grain storage in sealed chambers would have been essential. Even if later generations misunderstood, the tale may echo an original purpose. Historians are still debating whether such stories are pure legend or distorted memory. In survival architecture worldwide, water is always central. The raised villages of Southeast Asia, the stilt houses of the Amazon, the earth mounds of North America all elevate human life above flood. The pyramids, though larger and grander, follow the same principle. They are humanity's ultimate stilt houses, lifting people and culture beyond reach of water. Their permanence ensured survival not just for one flood, but for generations. In the end, water is both destroyer and preserver in the pyramid story. Floods may have inspired their construction, shaped their design, and filled their myths. Water carved the land, tested survival, and left scars still visible in stone. The pyramids stand as defiance, built not only to face the desert sun but also the roaring Nile, the storms of a wetter Sahara, and the unpredictable chaos of a changing world. The pyramids are often described as triumphs of sacred geometry. Their angles, proportions, and alignments have fascinated mathematicians and mystics alike for centuries. The Great Pyramid of Giza, in particular, contains numerical relationships so precise that some claim they must have been intentional. The base length divided by the height approximates 2 pi, linking the structure to the circle. The slope angle of its sides closely mirrors the ratio of the golden section. Its perimeter correlates with the circumference of the Earth at certain scales. Egyptologists generally argue that such correspondences are coincidental, the product of simple ratios chosen for stability. Yet for those who view the pyramids as more than tombs, the geometry may represent a survival code, a blueprint designed to embed knowledge necessary for enduring catastrophe. The fascination with pyramid geometry is not new. Ancient Greek writers, encountering the monuments long after their construction, speculated on their proportions. Medieval scholars, studying translations of Greek texts, wove mystical interpretations, claiming the pyramids encoded divine harmonies. Modern theorists have gone further, arguing that the Great Pyramid contains constants of mathematics and astronomy, the value of pi, the golden ratio, even the length of the solar year. Mainstream archaeology counters that the Egyptians worked with practical measures, not abstract constants. But the precision remains. Historians are still debating whether the geometry is coincidence, symbolic intention, or something deeper. If the pyramids were designed as shelters, geometry might have been more than sacred. It might have been practical. The slope angle of about 51.8 degrees is not only visually pleasing but structurally optimal, balancing stability against material cost. Too steep, and the pyramid would collapse under its own weight. Too shallow, and it would sprawl inefficiently. The chosen angle ensures maximum durability. Seen this way, the geometry reflects survival engineering, later overlaid with symbolism. Sacred ratios may have emerged not from mysticism, but from practical necessity, later reinterpreted as divine harmony. The orientation of the pyramids also fits this pattern. Aligned almost perfectly with the cardinal points, their precision is astonishing, deviating by less than a fraction of a degree. This alignment required careful astronomical observation, likely using the stars or the sun's shadow. Egyptologists argue this was symbolic, linking the pharaoh's tomb to cosmic order. Yet orientation also has practical value. Aligned structures distribute sunlight evenly, minimizing erosion on one side. They also anchor navigation. In a world of shifting rivers and sands, the stars offered reliable bearings. To align a shelter with the heavens was to ensure it endured not only storms of earth, but also cycles of time. Numerical correspondences within the Great Pyramid deepen the intrigue. Its base perimeter, when measured, approximates 1/43,200th of Earth's equatorial circumference. Its height corresponds to the Earth's polar radius at the same scale. Some argue these are coincidences. Others believe the builders encoded knowledge of the Earth's dimensions into stone, preserving it against catastrophe. If so, then the pyramid was both shelter and message, a monument that survived floods and dust storms while transmitting knowledge forward. Whether intentional or accidental, the geometry ties the pyramid not only to human survival but to planetary scale. Ancient myths support the idea of geometry, a survival code. The concept of Ma'at in Egyptian thought embodied balance, harmony, and cosmic order. To live by Ma'at was to align with the universe. The pyramids, in their geometry, may have been physical embodiments of Ma'at, harmonizing human structures with cosmic cycles. In survival terms, this was wisdom. Align with the cosmos, and you endure. Defy it, and catastrophe overwhelms. Later dynasties may have interpreted this philosophically, but its roots may lie in practical lessons of the Ice Age. Global parallels strengthen the case. In Mesoamerica, pyramids often aligned with solstices and equinoxes, marking times for planting and harvest. In Britain, Stonehenge's geometry tracked the sun and moon, guiding seasonal survival. In India, ancient temples incorporated sacred ratios reflecting cosmic cycles. Everywhere, geometry served not only ritual but also survival. To embed astronomy into stone was to ensure continuity, guiding future generations through climate shifts. Egypt's pyramids fit within this pattern, practical shelters that also taught. Their geometry, carved into stone, endured even when memory faded. One strange and almost off-topic anecdote comes from the late 19th century. A group of experimenters placed seeds, milk, and even small animals inside pyramid models built to the same ratios as Giza. They claim the seeds germinated faster, the milk resisted spoilage, and the animals appeared calmer. While such experiments are often dismissed as pseudoscience, they reflect enduring fascination with pyramid geometry as more than aesthetic. Whether real or imagined, the idea persists that the shape itself channels natural forces. If the builders observed subtle effects, perhaps in airflow, preservation, or acoustics, they may have designed the pyramids to exploit them. Historians are still debating whether pyramid geometry has hidden physical effects, or whether such claims are modern myths layered on ancient stone. The symbolic interpretations cannot be ignored. For Egyptians, numbers carried meaning. The number 4 represented stability, reflected in the pyramid's 4 sides. The triangle symbolized ascent. The combination, a 4-sided pyramid rising to a point, embodied both earth and sky, stability and transcendence. If these meanings were later imposed on shelters, they may have sanctified structures originally built for survival. A design chosen for practical reasons became sacred. Geometry transformed into ritual. Some theorists suggest the pyramids encode cycles of catastrophe. The precession of the equinoxes, a slow wobble of Earth's axis, alters the position of stars over 26,000 years. Alignments of the pyramids with Orion's belt may reflect skies around 10,500 BCE, near the onset of the Younger Dryas. If true, the geometry may preserve memory of past catastrophe, warning of cycles to come. The pyramids, then, are not only shelters but calendars, coded reminders of cosmic rhythms that bring disaster. Egyptologists remain skeptical, but the possibility lingers, unresolved. The geometry of the pyramids thus lies at the heart of the debate. Was it sacred or practical, symbolic or functional, coincidence or intention? The answer may be all at once. In times of survival, practical designs become sacred. In times of continuity, sacred symbols preserve practical lessons. The pyramid form, mathematically stable, became spiritually profound. Its geometry ensured endurance against storm, flood, and time, while also encoding harmony with cosmos. Whether or not the builders consciously encoded pi, phi, or Earth's dimensions, the result is the same, a monument that bridges survival and symbolism. In the end, the pyramids may be best understood as codes of resilience. Their geometry preserves knowledge of balance, proportion, and endurance. Whether interpreted as divine or practical, it carries the same message. Survival requires harmony, with nature, with cosmos, with time itself. The pyramids, in their sacred geometry, are survival manuals carved in stone, legacies of a people who endured catastrophe and sought to ensure their descendants would endure as well. The popular imagination sees pyramids as tombs filled with golden masks and mummified kings. For centuries, travellers expected to find treasures inside their stone walls, secret chambers glittering with wealth. Yet reality has proven far less dramatic. The Great Pyramid, largest and most famous of them all, yielded no mummy, no elaborate burial goods, and no painted scenes of the afterlife. Its silence puzzled early explorers and continues to puzzle historians today. How could the grandest tombs of Egypt be so empty? The answer, perhaps, lies in a history of reuse, reinterpretation, and misinterpretation. What began as survival shelters or ancient refuges may have been later claimed, repurposed, and rebranded as royal tombs, leaving us with layers of myth and misunderstanding. The presence of mummies in other pyramids is often cited as proof that all were intended as tombs. At Saqqara, smaller pyramids from later dynasties did contain remains, though often fragmentary. In the Pyramid of Unas, hieroglyphic inscriptions known as the pyramid texts line the walls, describing the pharaoh's journey into the afterlife. These inscriptions are among the oldest religious writings in the world. For Egyptologists, this is decisive. Pyramids were tombs, built for kings. Yet when compared to Giza, differences are stark. The Great Pyramid has no inscriptions, no decorated walls, no burial goods. Its chambers are bare. Was it truly the same kind of monument as Unas's pyramid, or something different entirely? Historians are still debating whether the Giza pyramids represent continuity or anomaly. Some argue that the emptiness is the result of robbery. Tomb raiding was rampant in antiquity. Even the Valley of the Kings, with its hidden and sealed tombs, was looted within centuries. Why should the pyramids be any different? Yet robbery alone does not explain everything. In robbed tombs, fragments usually remain: broken jars, discarded amulets, scraps of gold leaf. In the Great Pyramid, there is nothing, not a fragment, not a trace. The sarcophagus in the king's chamber is uninscribed and undecorated, unlike most royal coffins. It seems less like a coffin than a box, its simplicity out of step with Egyptian funerary traditions. This starkness has fueled centuries of speculation. Some early explorers believed the pyramids predated dynastic Egypt entirely, built by a forgotten civilization and only later claimed by pharaohs. Others argued that they were built as storage vaults, preserving grain, records, or tools against famine and flood. Medieval Arab chroniclers often repeated the story that Joseph, of biblical fame, used the pyramids as granaries during 7 years of famine. Though historically inaccurate, such stories reflect a deeper truth. The pyramids do not look like ordinary tombs. They look like something else, something meant to endure, not to display. The myths surrounding mummies also complicate the picture. In the 19th century, when Egyptomania swept Europe, mummies became commodities. They were shipped to London and Paris, unwrapped in public spectacles, even ground into powder for supposed medicinal use. Pyramids, by association, were imagined as endless storehouses of mummies waiting to be discovered. Popular fiction reinforced this view, filling pyramids with curses and treasures. Yet archaeology consistently revealed otherwise: empty chambers, barren walls. The myth of pyramids as mummy warehouses was a European creation, not an Egyptian reality. Egyptian dynasties themselves may have misunderstood or repurposed earlier monuments. If the pyramids of Giza were originally built as survival shelters or refuges, later rulers may have appropriated them as tombs, projecting new meanings onto older structures. This practice was common in antiquity. Temples were rededicated to new gods, fortresses became palaces, and caves once used for refuge became shrines. The pyramids too could have undergone such transformation. Their sheer permanence made them irresistible symbols of power. A king seeking legitimacy could claim them as his eternal house, even if their original function was different. One peculiar example of reuse comes from the Pyramid of Djoser, the step pyramid at Saqqara. Its vast network of underground passages far exceeds what would be needed for a single burial. Some chambers were filled with thousands of stone vessels, carved long before Djoser's reign. Why were these placed there? Were they offerings, or remnants of earlier traditions? Egyptologists disagree. Some see ritual, others see inheritance, later rulers incorporating older artifacts into their monuments. If this occurred at Saqqara, might it also have occurred at Giza? The pyramids may be palimpsests, rewritten across centuries, their original meaning obscured by layers of reuse. The misinterpretations extend to modern times. Early archaeologists often entered the pyramids with assumptions shaped by their own cultures. To Victorians steeped in biblical lore, pyramids were inevitably linked to Joseph, Moses, or Noah. To Enlightenment thinkers, they were symbols of reason and geometry. To modern tourists, they are exotic tombs. Each age projects its own expectations, rarely pausing to consider that the truth may be stranger, that the pyramids may never have been tombs at all but shelters, repurposed long after their original function was forgotten. The role of myth cannot be overstated. For Egyptians, myths of death and rebirth, of Osiris resurrected and Ra's daily journey through the underworld, gave meaning to monuments. Even if pyramids began as shelters, later generations could reinterpret them as tombs, weaving them into the religious fabric of the state. By the time of the pyramid texts, the symbolic layer had hardened. The pyramids became mountains of resurrection, stairways for kings to ascend to the stars. Yet beneath that symbolism may linger older memory of stone structures that once saved lives in times of catastrophe. Historians are still debating how much of Egyptian religion reflects practical survival, encoded as myth. Flood myths, solar cycles, and resurrection stories may all preserve fragments of Ice Age memory, transformed into ritual. The pyramids, in this sense, are both misinterpreted tombs and remembered shelters, their meanings layered across time. A curious, almost off-topic example of myth's power comes from outside Egypt. In Peru, Spanish chroniclers encountered Inca legends of stone giants who built walls before a great flood. These giants were said to have been destroyed, but their works remained. The Incas claimed them as their own, but the stories hinted at earlier builders. Whether true or not, the pattern is familiar. Monuments outlasting their creators, adopted by later cultures, reinterpreted through new myths. The pyramids of Egypt may have undergone the same fate. In the end, mummies, myths, and misinterpretations blur the truth. The pyramids are empty not because they failed, but because their purpose was never what we assumed. They may have been reused, rebranded, and reimagined, but their core function, survival, endurance, continuity, remains hidden beneath layers of myth. Their silence is their message, a message we may only now be learning to hear. Above the pyramids, the night sky stretches like an endless map of light. For ancient peoples, the stars were not decoration, but orientation, their slow movements telling of seasons, floods, and the passage of time. In Egypt, where the Nile's cycles dictated survival, astronomy was more than curiosity, it was necessity. The pyramids, aligned with such astonishing precision to celestial markers, reflect this relationship. To many scholars, these alignments are symbolic, linking kings with gods. Yet if the pyramids were also shelters, their astronomical design may have served a second purpose, guiding survival through time, predicting cycles of disaster, and anchoring communities to the sky when the Earth was unstable. The Giza pyramids are oriented almost perfectly north-south, their deviation less than a fraction of a degree. Such accuracy is remarkable, especially given the tools presumed available: plumb lines, sighting rods, and careful observation of the circumpolar stars. Egyptologists argue this alignment symbolized cosmic order, Mat, embedding divine balance into architecture. Yet alignment to true north also had practical uses. It ensured uniform exposure to the sun, minimizing uneven weathering. It provided a fixed orientation for navigation in a shifting landscape, when rivers changed course and dunes obscured landmarks. Survivors emerging from catastrophe would find in the pyramids not only refuge but compass, stone anchors pointing to the eternal heavens. Astronomical correlations deepen the intrigue. The three pyramids of Giza, when viewed from above, resemble the stars of Orion's belt: Alnitak, Alnilam, and Mintaka. Some researchers argue the resemblance is intentional, part of a broader Orion correlation theory. Mainstream scholars remain skeptical, noting discrepancies in scale and angle. Yet the possibility persists. Orion was associated with Osiris, god of death and rebirth. Symbolically, aligning pyramids to Orion linked kings with eternity. Practically, it may have encoded cycles of precession, the slow wobble of Earth's axis over 26,000 years. If the builders observed Orion's shifting position, they may have used it to track long-term cycles, perhaps even those of catastrophe. Historians are still debating whether such knowledge existed in the Old Kingdom, or whether it reflects earlier traditions carried forward. The alignment with Sirius, brightest star in the sky, is equally important. Sirius's rising heralded the annual flooding of the Nile, upon which Egyptian agriculture depended. Texts describe elaborate festivals tied to its appearance. For farmers, Sirius meant survival. If pyramids were shelters, then aligning them to Sirius ensured synchronization with the life-giving flood. Even in times of chaos, the stars offered reliable guidance. Watching the sky, survivors could know when to plant, when to prepare, when to retreat into stone. The shafts within the pyramid strengthen the astronomical connection. In the Great Pyramid, the northern shaft of the king's chamber points toward the circumpolar stars, immortal, never setting. The southern shaft aligns with Orion's belt. From the queen's chamber, shafts point towards Sirius and other stars associated with rebirth. Egyptologists interpret these as soul channels, guiding the pharaoh's spirit to the heavens. But shafts also functioned practically, providing ventilation. Duality is possible. Ritual symbolism and survival function combined. If survivors huddled within, the shafts gave them air. If priests later reinterpreted them, the shafts gave souls passage to the sky. The sky's role in survival becomes clearer when one considers precession. Over millennia, the slow wobble of Earth's axis shifts the positions of stars relative to the horizon. Ancient observers, patient and attentive, could detect this drift. If the pyramids encode alignments to skies not of 2500 BCE, but of 10,500 BCE, as some suggest, then they preserve memory of an earlier epoch, one marked by catastrophe at the onset of the Younger Dryas. Perhaps the builders, survivors of that chaos, fix their monuments to the stars of that age, preserving a calendar of cosmic cycles. If so, the pyramids are both shelters and star clocks, warning future generations that catastrophe returns in rhythm with the heavens. Global parallels reinforce this possibility. In Mesoamerica, Maya pyramids align with solstices and equinoxes, casting shadows that mark seasons. At Chichen Itza, the serpent shadow of Kukulkan appears at equinox, guiding planting. At Stonehenge, alignments mark solstices, tracking cycles of sun and moon. In Malta, temple doorways frame sunrise at key times of year. Everywhere, ancient monuments tied survival to sky. The pyramids fit within this tradition, their alignments not only symbolic but functional, preserving agricultural calendars and catastrophe cycles alike. Strange accounts from antiquity add further depth. Herodotus claimed Egyptian priests possessed records of the stars extending back thousands of years, far beyond dynastic reigns. He wrote of observations kept for tens of thousands of years, though modern historians dismiss this as exaggeration. Yet it suggests that Egyptians remembered skies not only of their own time but of earlier ages. If true, the pyramids may embody that memory, fixing in stone what was known of cycles too vast for fragile records. One peculiar, almost off-topic episode occurred in 1997, when astronomers studied alignments of the Giza pyramids with Orion's belt and found that the correlation fits skies of 10,500 BCE more closely than those of Khufu's time. The finding sparked controversy, embraced by alternative historians and rejected by Egyptologists. Skeptics argue the match is imperfect, requiring forced adjustments. Supporters claim the fit is intentional, preserving memory of a forgotten epoch. Historians are still debating, the evidence tantalizing but inconclusive. The symbolic layer cannot be denied. Egyptian religion tied sky and survival together. The pharaoh became a star in death, his pyramid the ramp to the heavens. The daily rising and setting of the sun mirrored life and rebirth. Yet these symbols may overlay older practical functions. To encode survival knowledge in myth was common. Flood cycles became stories of gods' battles. Star movements became tales of divine journeys. The pyramids, aligned to both, embody this duality. Myth for the future, practicality for the present. The sky also offered reassurance. In times of catastrophe, dust storms, floods, shifting rivers, the stars remained unchanged. Survivors could look upward and find order. Aligning shelters to the stars was more than science. It was comfort, anchoring fragile communities to something eternal. The pyramids, rising beneath Orion and Sirius, told people that chaos was not absolute, that continuity was possible. In this light, the pyramids are not only monuments of stone but monuments of sky. Their alignments preserve survival calendars, their shafts connect air and stars, their geometry encodes cycles of time. Whether consciously or not, the builders anchored humanity to the cosmos, ensuring that even in the face of catastrophe, guidance endured. And so the pyramids stand, mountains of stone beneath an eternal sky. Tombs, shelters, or both. They embody a dialogue between earth and heaven, survival and symbolism. Historians are still debating their purpose, but the stars above them continue to shine, just as they did in ages of ice and flood. In their silent geometry, the pyramids whisper not only of kings and gods, but of survival written in the sky. Controversy has always clung to the pyramids like shadows stretching across the desert at dusk. From the moment Europeans rediscovered them during the early centuries of exploration to modern archaeological debates, arguments about their age, purpose, and meaning have divided scholars and enthusiasts alike. The idea of the pyramids as Ice Age shelters belongs to this realm of controversy, one where evidence is tantalizing, interpretation is heated, and certainty is elusive. To understand this debate is to wander into a labyrinth of archaeology, myth, and ambition, where facts and speculation blend like shifting sand in the wind. The mainstream academic position is firm. The pyramids of Giza were constructed during Egypt's Old Kingdom, roughly 4,500 years ago, as tombs for the pharaohs Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure. Hieroglyphs inside quarry marks above the king's chamber link Khufu's name to the Great Pyramid, anchoring it to his reign. Archaeological evidence shows construction ramps, workmen's villages, and tool fragments consistent with the period. Scholars argue the pyramids were monuments of power and belief, built to honour kings and connect them with gods. In this view, any suggestion of Ice Age origins is fantasy, unsupported by evidence. Yet critics point out cracks in this consensus. The quarry marks naming Khufu, discovered in the 19th century, have themselves been questioned. Some argue they were forged, or at least misinterpreted, to support existing assumptions. Others note that while worker villages prove construction during the Old Kingdom, they do not exclude the possibility that the pyramids were built upon or rebuilt from older foundations. The precision of construction, the alignment to true north, the scale of stone cutting, the near-perfect geometry, seems to some excessive for a funerary monument. Why would so much effort go into tombs when no mummies were ever found inside the pyramids themselves? Historians are still debating whether the pyramids were truly intended as burial places, or whether their tomb-like qualities are overlays upon earlier functions. One source of controversy lies in erosion. At the Sphinx, water erosion patterns carved into the limestone body suggest long exposure to heavy rainfall, not desert wind and sand. Egyptologists maintain this can be explained by periodic flooding or by the natural porous quality of limestone. But geologists such as Robert Schoch argue the erosion matches rainfall levels not seen in Egypt for thousands of years, possibly as far back as 10,000 BCE, during the tail end of the Ice Age. If the Sphinx is older than dynastic Egypt, could the pyramids share that age? Some scholars remain unconvinced, but the debate lingers, unresolved. Theories of advanced lost civilizations fuel the controversy. Writers like Graham Hancock and John Anthony West suggest the pyramids may preserve knowledge from an earlier epoch, when a civilization, unknown to history, constructed monumental works before vanishing in catastrophe. These ideas, popular with the public, are often dismissed by mainstream Egyptologists as pseudoscience. Yet the allure persists. If the pyramids were Ice Age shelters, then their existence implies survival of advanced knowledge across epochs, something both thrilling and unsettling. The academic establishment resists such interpretations not merely from evidence but from caution. Archaeology, like any science, relies on consensus, built upon accumulated data. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof, and so far, proof of Ice Age pyramids is elusive. Critics argue alternative theories cherry-pick anomalies while ignoring the broader mass of evidence for Old Kingdom construction. But defenders of alternative views counter that the weight of orthodox belief discourages exploration of anomalies, silencing questions before they are tested. The tension reflects not only science but human nature, the desire for certainty in a world of shifting sands. New discoveries complicate the picture further. In 2017, researchers using muon tomography, a scanning technique capable of detecting voids within stone, found a large unexplained cavity inside the Great Pyramid, above the Grand Gallery. Its purpose remains unknown. Egyptologists argue it may be a relieving chamber, part of structural design. Alternative theorists suggest it could be an untouched space, perhaps a relic of earlier functions. The fact that a cavity this size remained undiscovered after centuries of study underscores how much remains hidden. Each discovery sparks new debates, drawing old controversies back into the light. Another puzzle lies in the sheer scale of construction. The Great Pyramid contains an estimated 2.3 million blocks, some weighing more than 70 tons. Traditional explanations point to ramps and large workforces, consistent with evidence of worker villages. Yet no ramp system large enough to account for the placement of the highest stones has ever been conclusively identified. Historians are still debating whether such feats required techniques now lost, or whether the simplicity of ramps, levers, and manpower suffices. For some, the lack of clear answers leaves room for speculation about forgotten technologies, perhaps carried over from an earlier age. Controversy also extends to myths surrounding the pyramids. Ancient Arab traditions spoke of the pyramids as granaries built by Joseph, preserving grain through famine. Medieval travellers described them as fortresses against floods. Renaissance scholars imagined them as magical repositories of wisdom, storing knowledge from before the flood. These interpretations, though far from modern archaeology, reflect an enduring sense of the pyramids as survival structures. Even if historians dismiss them as legend, the persistence of these stories suggests that the pyramids' association with survival runs deep in cultural memory. One strange, almost off-topic episode occurred in the 9th century, when Caliph al-Ma'mun ordered the forced entry into the Great Pyramid. His men tunnelled into the north face, eventually reaching the descending passage. Inside, they found no treasures, only empty chambers. The absence of gold or mummies baffled them. Some chroniclers claim they found mechanical devices or strange inscriptions, though these accounts are inconsistent. What is certain is that the Great Pyramid was empty when breached, adding fuel to the question: if it was built as a tomb, why was it devoid of a body? Egyptologists argue looting in antiquity removed the contents. Alternative theorists suggest the emptiness is original, because the structure served a purpose other than burial. The politics of archaeology add another layer. In modern Egypt, the pyramids are symbols of national identity, central to tourism and heritage. Challenges to the mainstream narrative are often met with resistance, perceived as threats to cultural pride. Scholars defending alternative theories sometimes find themselves at odds not only with academics, but with national institutions. The debate becomes not only about evidence, but about ownership of history. Who decides what the pyramids mean, and how do cultural, political, and financial interests shape that meaning? Yet despite heated debate, a curious convergence emerges. Whether tombs, temples, or shelters all agree that the pyramids were monumental investments of labour and belief. They testify to human capacity for order, vision, and survival. Controversies about their function may never resolve, but the very persistence of debate keeps them alive, ensuring that these stone mountains remain central to humanity's imagination. If the pyramids were Ice Age shelters, the controversies surrounding them take on new meaning. Erosion marks, unexplained voids, astronomical alignments, legends of survival, all become fragments of a larger puzzle. Historians are still debating whether these fragments add up to evidence of forgotten epochs. But to dismiss them outright is to ignore the very mystery that gives the pyramids their enduring power. The controversies themselves may be the point. Like the stars above them, the pyramids invite interpretation, shifting as perspectives change. Their stones carry memory, but not answers. Their chambers echo with questions, not conclusions. In their silence, they force humanity to confront uncertainty, to weigh evidence against belief, to navigate the boundary between knowledge and imagination. Perhaps that is why the pyramids endure, not because they offer certainty, but because they contain controversy. Each stone is a challenge, each alignment a puzzle, each void a whisper of the unknown. To some, they are tombs, to others, shelters. To all, they are mysteries carved in stone, surviving not only the sands of time but the storms of human debate. In the dim corridors of the pyramids, where dust hangs like forgotten breath and hieroglyphs whisper through the ages, lies a collection of writings known as the Pyramid Texts. Carved into the walls of Saqqara's pyramids, these inscriptions are among the oldest religious writings in human history, dating back over 4,000 years. To Egyptologists, they are spells and prayers designed to guide pharaohs into the afterlife. But if the pyramids were Ice Age shelters, then these texts might also preserve a different kind of knowledge, codes for survival, veiled beneath the language of gods. The pyramid texts cover a vast range of incantations. Some describe the king ascending to the sky to join the sun god. Others speak of opening doors, of climbing ladders of light, of escaping floods and chaos. Egyptologists interpret this as poetic symbolism, the pharaoh's journey beyond death. Yet beneath the metaphor, alternative thinkers sense practical instruction. What if the ladders and doors described were real architectural passages? What if references to floods echoed memories of ancient deluges? Historians are still debating whether the texts should be read purely as religious literature or whether they encode memories of earlier catastrophes. The texts are clustered in pyramids such as those of Unas, Teti, and Pepi II. Unlike the Great Pyramid, which contains no inscriptions, these pyramids carry walls thick with carved words. One passage describes the king avoiding the floodwaters that rise. Another speaks of him not drowning in the great waters. To mainstream scholars, these are symbolic struggles, metaphors of chaos conquered by divine order. But for those who see the pyramids as shelters, the warnings sound more literal. If floods swept the Nile Valley at the end of the Ice Age, survival instructions might have been woven into ritual speech, preserved through repetition until carved permanently into stone. Strangely, some passages of the pyramid text emphasize nourishment, grain, and the sustenance of life. Scholars tie this to offerings for the dead, yet alternative interpreters connect it to survival caches. Legends outside Egypt, the biblical story of Joseph storing grain, the Arabian belief that pyramids served as granaries, align curiously with this emphasis. If the pyramids functioned as storage shelters, then these texts may reflect not only rituals but also practical knowledge, wrapped in sacred words to ensure survival. The role of sound also surfaces. Some incantations are designed to be spoken aloud, their rhythms carrying power. In a survival context, sound might not only be spiritual but functional, used to signal, to coordinate movement in echoing chambers, or even to influence stress in stone through resonance. Experiments in acoustics show that certain chambers in the Great Pyramid amplify frequencies in peculiar ways. Could the pyramid texts, spoken in ritual tones, have been part of an ancient science of sound blending religion and engineering? Egyptologists remain skeptical, but the possibility adds a haunting dimension. Another layer of the texts is their celestial imagery. Stars, constellations, and cosmic pathways fill the inscriptions. The king sails with Orion, joins Sirius, rises with the sun. Orthodox interpretation sees this as the pharaoh's divinization, becoming one with eternal cycles. Yet for those who imagine Ice Age shelters, star maps may have doubled as navigational charts. If survivors of catastrophe tracked skies to mark seasons, migrations, or safe havens, then the texts could encode practical astronomy disguised as theology. Scholars are still debating whether the astronomical alignments in Egyptian monuments were primarily religious or also functional, linked to agricultural survival after great floods. Among the strangest elements are the repeated references to doors and gates. The texts describe gates of the sky that must be opened, guarded by beings who demand passwords. In religious terms, this symbolizes trials before joining the gods. But the imagery also mirrors practical architecture. Passageways guarded, sealed chambers requiring keys or codes. The idea of survival shelters with protected entrances echoes through modern interpretations. Was this language metaphorical, or a memory of controlled access to hidden vaults where food, tools, and people waited out the storm? The pyramid texts also contain language of fear, chaos serpents, devouring waters, enemies at the threshold. Egyptologists call this the eternal struggle of order versus chaos, Ma'at versus Isfet. But to those who read it as survival lore, these monsters may represent natural forces, floods, storms, invading groups seeking refuge. In that reading, the texts are not only myths, but survival warnings, encoding how to resist disaster both natural and human. Curiously, there are also passages about breath and air. Spells ask for air to be given to the king, for his nostrils to open, for him to breathe in eternity. Mainstream views interpret this as symbolic of life after death. But in the context of sealed chambers, the words sound practical. Air would be precious in a shelter sealed against flood or storm. Instructions for ventilation could easily be cloaked in sacred language, ensuring their repetition and preservation. Modern studies of pyramid shafts suggest they could have served ventilation purposes as well as astronomical alignments. Historians are still debating whether these shafts had symbolic meaning alone, or whether they fulfilled practical survival needs. The texts extend beyond Egypt's pyramids. Later versions, called the Coffin texts and the Book of the Dead, adapt these spells into portable form, painted on coffins and papyrus. Over time, the practical memory may have been lost, leaving only religious echoes. If so, then what began as survival codes may have evolved into theology. Survivors of catastrophe passed down instruction as sacred story. Later generations, no longer facing the same floods, remembered only the spiritual shell. The pyramid, once a refuge, became a tomb in cultural memory. Controversy deepens when scholars note similarities between pyramid text themes and myths from other cultures. In Mesopotamia, flood epics speak of divine instruction saving chosen survivors. In India, the tale of Manu describes survival through a great flood, guided by gods. Even in Mesoamerica, myths of world ages ending in water and fire parallel the Egyptian concern with chaos and renewal. Are these merely universal human fears, or shared memories of actual Ice Age catastrophes encoded across continents? Historians are still debating whether such parallels reflect diffusion of stories or coincidence born of common human experience. An odd off-topic discovery in 1954 ties back to these ideas: the solar boat of Khufu, buried in a pit beside the Great Pyramid. When reassembled, the cedar vessel stretched over 40 metres long, clearly capable of navigating the Nile. Egyptologists say it symbolised the king's journey with the sun god across the heavens. But in the context of survival, some see it as a literal rescue craft, preserved in case floods returned. Its careful burial might mark a ritualised memory of a time when boats saved lives during inundation. The pyramid texts, with their imagery of celestial boats, might echo both spiritual and practical voyages. To imagine the pyramid texts as survival codes is to shift perspective. The language of gods, stars, and afterlife remains, but beneath it, one hears other voices, warnings of water, instructions for air, signs in the sky. These voices speak not only of death, but of endurance, of living through disaster. The texts then become not merely hymns for the dead, but manuals for the living, disguised to endure through millennia. If the pyramids were Ice Age shelters, then the pyramid texts are among the last echoes of that forgotten knowledge. They bridge two worlds, the practical struggle of survival and the spiritual hunger for meaning. Their ambiguity is their strength. In poetry, they preserved memory. In myth, they transmitted instruction. In stone, they ensured continuity. Whether read as tomb liturgy or survival code, they remind humanity that beneath faith lies experience, and beneath myth lies history. The pyramids, majestic in their silence, stand as monuments not only to ancient craftsmanship, but also to abandonment. At some point, the vast resources, labour, and devotion once poured into their construction ceased. The Old Kingdom, which gave birth to these immense structures, collapsed around 2200 BCE. To Orthodox historians, the explanation rests in climate change, famine, political fragmentation, and economic exhaustion. Yet if the pyramids were Ice Age shelters, their sudden decline might conceal a more catastrophic story, one of knowledge lost, functions forgotten, and fear buried beneath ritual. The end of the Old Kingdom coincided with what climatologists call the 4.2 kilo-year event, a severe drought that rippled across the Near East. Evidence from lake cores, tree rings, and desert sediments shows rainfall dropping sharply, the Nile's floods shrinking, harvests failing. Inscriptions from Egypt's provinces describe hunger, cannibalism, and local uprisings. Mainstream scholars explain the collapse of pyramid building as a symptom of this environmental crisis. Central authority weakened, food was scarce, and giant stone tombs became impossible luxuries. Yet another reading suggests the drought exposed a deeper truth. The pyramids were not functioning as intended. If these massive monuments had once served as Ice Age shelters, designed for floods and storms, they might have been useless during drought. Their chambers could shield from water, but not from famine. Grain stores might have run dry, ventilation shafts may have become suffocating, and the structures once designed for survival against deluge could not answer the crisis of absence. Abandonment, then, might have been less about political will and more about broken utility. Historians are still debating whether the pyramids fell out of use simply from cost, or because their original function had failed in the face of changing climate. Archaeological remains hint at desperate improvisations. At Elephantine Island, inscriptions describe officials digging wells deeper and deeper as the Nile's levels dropped. In the Fayum, settlement evidence shows migration towards shrinking water sources. Meanwhile, in pyramid complexes, unfinished construction projects were left to crumble. The pyramid of unfinished northern stone, a collapsed mound of broken blocks, might testify to an abandoned shelter when resources no longer justified completion. Alternative researchers argue that this period marks the point where the pyramids shifted from functional architecture to purely symbolic monuments. Once, they may have served as refuges. Afterward, they became tombs in cultural memory. Pharaohs continued to build pyramids in the Middle Kingdom, but they were smaller, weaker, often made of mud brick. These were monuments in name only, echoes of a lost practice. Like copying a sacred design without grasping its purpose, they mark the erosion of practical knowledge. The collapse also coincided with mythic memories of chaos. Later Egyptian texts speak of times when the river is empty and men are few. Folklore from the First Intermediate period remembers a society in disarray, where the dead lay unburied and cities fell silent. In a survival context, this could reflect not just famine, but a failed system of shelters. If the pyramids once held people, food, or tools during catastrophe, their inability to save lives in drought would have been devastating. One of the strangest hints comes from the change in burial practices. During the Old Kingdom, pharaohs were buried in grand pyramids. After the collapse, rulers were interred in smaller tombs, sometimes in hidden valleys. Historians explain this as cost-cutting and increased threat of tomb robbery. Yet one could read it differently. The pyramid had failed. Its promise of protection, whether physical or spiritual, was broken. The shelter became a target, vulnerable rather than safe. Kings may have turned to secrecy and burials not only for security, but because the pyramid no longer held meaning. Theories of catastrophe also linger around evidence of sudden violence. In some provincial tombs, archaeologists discovered skeletons with signs of conflict, smashed skulls, and hasty burials. Political upheaval certainly played a role, but some interpret this as competition for resources after the pyramid system faltered. If the shelters once centralized survival, their loss may have thrown the population into violent struggle, no longer united by a functioning refuge. Meanwhile, strange anomalies remain in the record. For example, radiocarbon studies of organic material inside the Great Pyramid sometimes return dates centuries earlier than conventional chronologies. Scholars argue over contamination and measurement error, but some alternative theorists suggest this points to a structure far older than Khufu, perhaps built or repurposed long before the Old Kingdom. If so, then abandonment during the First Intermediate period might not have been the first failure, but merely the latest in cycles of use and disuse. Historians are still debating whether anomalies in pyramid dating represent flaws in testing or deeper mysteries of construction chronology. Another controversial layer comes from geological studies of erosion. At the Sphinx, geologist Robert Schoch argued in the 1990s that weathering patterns suggest rainfall, erosion dating back to a wetter period, long before dynastic Egypt. If his claims are correct, the Sphinx, and by extension, perhaps nearby pyramids, may predate the official timeline. Egyptologists dispute his conclusions, attributing the erosion to wind and salt. Yet if correct, It implies that pyramids or their prototypes might have been built in earlier climatic eras, abandoned, then reused by later dynasties who misunderstood their purpose. In that view, the collapse of the Old Kingdom was not the abandonment of pyramids altogether, but the second abandonment. The first occurred when Ice Age floods receded, and the structures were no longer necessary. The second came when drought proved them useless. Each cycle stripped more of their meaning until only husks remained, monuments mistaken for tombs. There are also legends that suggest knowledge was deliberately suppressed. Medieval Arab historians recorded tales of kings sealing wisdom within pyramids before catastrophe, storing texts, treasures, and sciences of the ancients. Some versions describe the pyramids as archives of pre-flood civilizations. Egyptologists dismiss these as fanciful medieval myth-making. But their persistence raises questions. Why were pyramids remembered as repositories rather than tombs in these traditions? If abandonment came with secrecy, perhaps survivors concealed the truth of their function, cloaking it in story. An odd off-topic story further complicates the picture. The so-called Famine stela, carved during the Ptolemaic period but set in a mythical Old Kingdom time. It describes King Djoser facing 7 years of famine, seeking help from the god Khnum. Scholars see it as a late fabrication to glorify local cults, but its imagery of famine tied to a pyramid-building pharaoh is striking. Did later generations remember not just grandeur but disaster linked to the Pyramid Age? Even more haunting are the sealed chambers still unexplored within the pyramids. Modern scanning projects reveal voids in the Great Pyramid, empty spaces untouched since construction. Egyptologists suggest they are structural gaps, relieving pressure from above. Others imagine hidden archives or sealed survival chambers left unused. The very existence of these voids evokes abandonment. Spaces built for a purpose never fulfilled, sealed when no longer needed, waiting in silence for millennia. When catastrophe theories are considered, abandonment becomes less a single event and more a pattern. Structures designed for one kind of survival, repeatedly failing against another. Flood shelters could not save against drought. Granaries could not preserve enough food against famine. Political systems tied to these shelters fractured when they proved inadequate. What remained were monuments too massive to erase, yet too broken to continue using. The pyramids, then, embody the paradox of resilience and fragility. Their stones endure, but their functions could not. Their abandonment reminds us that survival requires adaptability, not permanence. If they were Ice Age shelters, they may have saved countless lives once, only to fail in the next crisis. The silence of their corridors today echoes with the memory of not one, but many abandonments, cycles of construction, refuge, despair, and loss. The pyramids of Egypt are not the only ancient structures whose legends intertwine with survival, catastrophe, and forgotten knowledge. Across continents, myths and monuments echo a shared memory. Vast stone refuges built to endure forces beyond ordinary human strength. If the Egyptian pyramids once served as Ice Age shelters, their legacy may ripple outward, inspiring or reflecting a global survivalist tradition. These connections, though elusive, suggest that humanity may have encoded its oldest fears and strategies of endurance in enduring forms of architecture. In Mesopotamia, the Ziggurats rise as stepped mountains of clay and brick. Unlike the pyramids, they are tiered, layered with terraces ascending toward shrines. Yet their foundations echo similar themes, artificial mountains designed to touch the heavens and withstand the floods below. The Sumerian tale of Ziusudra, later echoed as Utnapishtim in the Epic of Gilgamesh, speaks of a cataclysmic deluge. Gods warned the hero to construct a vessel to save life. But scholars note that flood imagery also pervades temple-building traditions. Some researchers suggest the Ziggurats themselves symbolize both refuge and ascent, a survivalist instinct manifest in brick. Historians are still debating whether ziggurats were purely symbolic or also intended as literal high grounds during flooding. Farther east in India, the myths of the Mahabharata and the Puranas speak of subterranean shelters where sages and survivors waited out catastrophes. Vast caves, known as patalas, were described as homes of gods and refuges for humankind during cycles of destruction. Archaeologists exploring the Barabar caves, with their polished granite interiors dating back to the Mauryan period, note the uncanny resemblance to man-made survival chambers. The caves resonate with acoustic properties that some describe as otherworldly. While historians interpret them as ritual sanctuaries, alternative theories whisper that they echo an ancient survival tradition. Spaces carved not only for worship but also for hiding from a hostile environment. In Mesoamerica, the Great Pyramids of Teotihuacan, the Temple of the Sun and the Temple of the Moon rise with a geometric precision that mirrors the Egyptian desert giants. Legends preserved by the Aztecs tell of gods gathering at Teotihuacan to reignite the sun after a cosmic darkness. Beneath these pyramids, archaeologists discovered vast tunnels, sealed chambers lined with liquid mercury and pyrite. Scholars interpret these as symbolic rivers of the underworld. Yet one could read them differently, as echoes of underground refuges, attempts to mimic the protection of hidden chambers against a past cataclysm. The tunnels may have preserved rituals of survival, cloaked in myth when memory blurred. Myths of global flood survivors also suggest pyramids as mnemonic devices. In Central America, the Maya preserved stories of repeated world ages, destroyed by fire, water, and darkness. Their stepped pyramids, oriented to celestial alignments, may have been more than observatories. They could embody survival calendars, reminders of cycles to endure. Historians are still debating whether the cyclical destruction myths of the Maya were purely cosmological or also rooted in memory of real environmental upheavals. Even in the Pacific, far from deserts and river valleys, the megalithic culture of Nan Madol in Micronesia constructed artificial islands with basalt blocks stacked into fortress-like platforms. Local legends speak of giants who raised these stones, and of a kingdom swallowed by catastrophe. Though not pyramids in form, the principle is similar. Stone shelters in hostile environments, resistant to waves and storms. Scholars still struggle to explain how such structures were built, or why they were later abandoned. In Europe, echoes emerge in myths of underground chambers built by survivors of great floods. Irish legends tell of the Tuatha De Danann retreating into the hollow hills. Norse sagas recount survivors hiding within mountain halls during Ragnarok. In Britain, Neolithic barrows and passage graves resemble burial mounds, but alternative theorists argue they also functioned as survival shelters, earth-insulated chambers resisting temperature extremes. If pyramids were once Ice Age shelters, these European structures may represent smaller-scale counterparts, adapted to local conditions. Even stranger are the myths of hidden libraries, where knowledge was stored to await rediscovery after destruction. The Alexandrian historians wrote of books sealed in stone temples before the flood, later rediscovered by priests. Islamic chroniclers describe pyramids as vaults, containing sciences of the stars, medicine, and metallurgy, hidden from catastrophe. These tales might preserve fragments of a survivalist ethos, not only saving bodies, but saving knowledge itself. The legacy of survival shelters may also explain recurring architectural forms. The pyramid shape, whether stepped or smooth, appears in Egypt, Sudan, Mesoamerica, China, and Indonesia. Conventional archaeology explains this as independent invention. The pyramid is a stable structure, easy to build tall. But if viewed through survivalist memory, the pyramid may represent something deeper, a universal archetype of refuge, a mountain against chaos. Its recurrence could stem from remembered utility, passed along myths, and instinctual reconstruction after each catastrophe. The Great Pyramid shafts, the Teotihuacan tunnels, the Indian caves, the Mesopotamian ziggurats, all share traits of secrecy, interior chambers, and alignment to natural cycles. These could be coincidental, but together they hint at a survivalist network of ideas. To endure the world's violence, one must build in stone, align to the sky, and prepare to hide. One of the strangest myths linking global traditions is the idea of survivors emerging from mountains after floods. In Greece, Deucalion and Pyrrha survive by retreating to Parnassus. In China, Yu the Great tames the floodwaters by cutting channels from high ground. In Mesoamerica, Coxcox and his wife survive atop a tree or mountain. These stories are not about floating arks but about ascending and hiding, parallels to the pyramid as shelter hypothesis. Historians are still debating whether such parallels are shared cultural memory or convergent storytelling. The survivalist legacy also appears in symbols of rebirth. Egyptian mythology links the pyramid to the Benben stone, the primeval mound that rose above chaotic waters. In India, the cosmic mountain Meru stands at the centre of creation. In Mesoamerica, the world was renewed atop pyramids after cycles of destruction. These cosmological images may encode not just spiritual rebirth, but literal survival, the memory of ancestors climbing stone mounds to escape flood, then re-emerging as the seed of a new age. Yet, the pyramids also carry a darker inheritance. Abandoned shelters can become tombs, and forgotten refuges may be mistaken for graves. As civilizations forgot their original functions, they reinterpreted these structures as mausoleums, places for kings rather than crowds. The survivalist architecture of one age became the death cult of another. This transformation itself is a legacy, reminding us that memory can decay, knowledge can twist, and what once saved lives may later bury them in misunderstanding. Controversial discoveries continue to add fuel to these theories. In 2015, deep penetrating radar beneath Teotihuacan revealed liquid mercury pools, unnerving researchers with their toxic symbolism. In 2017, scanning technology revealed hidden voids within the Great Pyramid. In Turkey, the discovery of the Derinkuyu underground city showed that entire populations could hide beneath Earth during crisis. Each of these findings suggests that survivalist architecture may be a broader human theme, not a local Egyptian anomaly. A strange off-topic myth illustrates this global echo. The Hopi people of North America tell of emerging from underground after previous worlds were destroyed by fire and flood. They describe ant-like beings guiding them through caverns until it was safe to return. Archaeologists interpret this as allegory. Yet the details, the underground refuge, the emergence, the guidance, resonate uncannily with global survival myths. Could the pyramids of Egypt too be one node of this greater web? The survivalist legacy may not be about one culture alone, but about humanity itself. Whether in the sands of Giza, the terraces of Mesopotamia, the caves of India, or the pyramids of Mexico, people remembered cataclysm and responded with stone. They encoded fear into form, knowledge into monument, survival into myth. Today, these structures stand as riddles, their practical functions obscured by ritual explanations. But beneath the veneer of tombs and temples may lie the deeper truth, a network of survival shelters, echoes of an ice age when humanity learned to outlast nature's fury by building mountains of its own. And if the pyramids of Egypt were indeed ice age shelters, then they are not anomalies but survivors of a greater story, a human story of resilience carved into the bones of the earth, shared across cultures, and whispered in myths that refuse to die. If the pyramids were once ice age shelters, then they are not merely monuments to kings or tombs for dynasties. They become testaments to survival, reminders that humanity has faced near annihilation before and found a way to endure. Their very presence, towering over the desert, may be less about power and more about continuity, bridges between worlds that nearly ended and worlds that began anew. The final layers of evidence that sustain this hypothesis are found not only in archaeology, but in geology, climatology, and myth. The Younger Dryas cold snap, beginning roughly 12,900 years ago, was a sudden climatic shift that plunged the Northern Hemisphere back into glacial conditions. It was catastrophic for ecosystems, forcing human groups into desperate strategies for survival. In Egypt, the Nile Valley would have been a fragile refuge, hemmed in by desert. Building stone shelters insulated against extremes of heat and cold may not have been folly but necessity. Historians are still debating whether large-scale construction could have occurred during this era. Mainstream scholarship insists that the pyramids date to the 4th dynasty, around 2600 BCE. Yet the possibility of earlier phases, structures repaired, expanded or repurposed, cannot be dismissed outright. Geological evidence of water erosion on the Sphinx enclosure suggests prolonged rainfall, inconsistent with the hyper-arid climate of later Egypt. Some geologists argue this points to a wetter epoch, potentially aligning with Ice Age transitions. If so, the pyramids may preserve elements of a survivalist past, even if later civilizations reinterpreted them as tombs. The idea of shelters becoming tombs reflects a transformation of function into myth. What once saved may later signify death. Egyptians may have inherited stone refuges and turned them into mortuary complexes, surrounding them with rituals of afterlife. The survival of bodies became the survival of souls, reframed to fit cultural needs. This transition itself may explain why pyramids endure. They were not abandoned, but integrated into living traditions. Strange artifacts complicate the story. Cavities detected within the Great Pyramid by Muon tomography in 2017 hint at hidden spaces, possibly untouched since construction. Scholars debate whether they are structural gaps or secret chambers. If chambers, they might have held supplies, tools, or records meant for survival. But without entry, they remain enigmatic. Other anomalies, such as the sealed shafts leading to hidden doors within the Queen's chamber, continue to tantalize with the possibility of undiscovered functions. Myths from later cultures add eerie resonance. Islamic historians describe pyramids as libraries of antediluvian knowledge. Medieval travelers claim they held maps of the heavens and machines of forgotten sciences. While these stories lack hard evidence, they illustrate how deeply the pyramids inspired speculation about survival and inheritance from a lost age. Historians are still debating whether such tales were embellishments or fragments of forgotten traditions. The hypothesis of Ice Age shelters also raises unsettling implications for modern times. If ancestors built stone mountains to survive catastrophic climate shifts, what does that say about human vulnerability today? The pyramids might not only be relics, but warnings, silent reminders that civilization is fragile against the violence of nature. They suggest that foresight and preparation are ancient instincts woven into human survival. A strange off-topic resonance comes from modern seed vaults, such as the Svalbard Global Seed Vault in Norway, designed to preserve biodiversity in case of disaster. These vaults echo the principle of pyramids as survivalist structures, knowledge and life sealed in stone, waiting for renewal after collapse. Humanity, it seems, continues to repeat ancient strategies in new forms. The survival instinct has never left. If the pyramids were shelters, their builders achieved something profound. They did not simply survive for themselves, but built for generations they would never meet. They constructed continuity in stone, carrying the burden of fear into the future as protection and memory. That is why, perhaps, they feel both awe-inspiring and unsettling. They are not just monuments of kings. They may be monuments of survival, reminders of fragility, and echoes of a nearly lost world. As the story of the pyramids draws to a close, the desert quiets. The stones no longer carry the weight of speculation or mystery. They simply stand, as they always have, patient in their silence, unmoved by centuries of wind and sand. Whether they were tombs, temples, or shelters against a violent ice age, their presence whispers a truth deeper than certainty. Humanity has always searched for ways to endure. The sands around Giza glow softly in the last light of day. Shadows stretch long across the plateau, covering the monuments like a blanket. In this moment, Their mystery no longer feels urgent but calming. What they represent is not just debate or unanswered questions, but the endurance of memory, the resilience of stone, and the fragile persistence of life. The thought that they might once have been shelters does not diminish their grandeur. If anything, it deepens their story. These pyramids could carry not only the legacy of kings, but the quiet courage of survival. And if that is true, then perhaps every stone is also a promise, that what was lost once can be found again, and that even in the harshest winters of history humanity can endure. So now, as the final words drift into the stillness, let them soften into the silence of night. The mystery remains, but it no longer presses. It lingers gently, like a half-remembered dream. Rest now, with the pyramids in mind, their edges softened by time and distance. Imagine their chambers, cool and still, holding both memory and protection. Let their weight anchor you, steady and safe as the night deepens. Good night.